Lord of the Rings, released over a span of a year from 1954 to 1955, John Ronald Reuel Tolkien, or J.R.R. Tolkien for short, published his sequel trilogy to his first beloved novel, The Hobbit, and it's gone on to release over 150 million copies just from Lord of the Rings alone, and over 600 million from all of his work. Their franchise is seen as the crown jewel of fantasy fiction, and it's the main source of inspiration for many fantasy media to this very day. In 1997, New Zealand filmmaker Peter Jackson, alongside his wife Fran Walsh and friend as well as producer Philippa Boyens.
Hi, I'm Peter Jackson, the director and co-writer and producer of The Lord of the Rings.
Hi, I'm Fran. I have a writing credit on the film and a producing credit.
Hi, I'm Philippa Boyens. I only have a writing credit on the film.
And we're up here in our office in Miramar, New Zealand, having a look at this movie. A little bit of a different version of the film than what you're used to seeing in the theatres. This is the extended cut version.
Approached New Line Cinema to create their own adaptation of Lord of the Rings, which New Line approved, giving them 3 movies to tell their version of Middle-earth. Production began in August of 1997, and with over 2 years of pre-production alone, they began filming the trilogy in a 14-month-long period of principal photography from 1999 to 2000. In December 2001, the first movie of the trilogy was released, The Fellowship of the Ring. Hello there guys and welcome back. Today we're starting my most ambitious project I've ever conducted, a full analysis of the Peter Jackson Lord of the Rings trilogy. While there have been many videos throughout the years of YouTube that covers these movies, I've never really seen any type that I hope to achieve today. A full chronological breakdown of these movies scene by scene in a long video format. After seeing there hasn't really been that many videos of this sort covering these movies in this type of manner, I just thought,
fine, I'll do it myself.
I hope for this being my own crown jewel on this platform, because these movies are near and dear to me, being my all-time favorite movies since I was a kid, since they were my introduction to this franchise, as is the case with many people nowadays, I presume. I'll be giving all sorts of behind-the-scenes information I've learned from my research on these movies. I don't want to simply be giving facts on the production of the movie. I also want to dissect the writing and what makes it some of the best that any movie ever made, such as how it surpasses many movies or any pieces of media nowadays. And as someone who's read the Lord of the Rings books a handful of times now, I'll also be judging these movies as adaptations to see what they do right and wrong. And even though I will be praising these movies to high heaven, I will be as objective as possible when assessing these movies. Any flaws that I find with them will be brought up. That being said, there are a lot of really bad criticisms against these movies as well, both from die-hard Tolkien fans or even just the casual fans that are just really stupid, so I want to make sure that those are debunked as well. I don't want to take up any more time with this intro, because we've got a lot to talk about just from this one movie alone, let alone the other 2. I'm not sure how long it'll take for me to release the other 2, but I'll do my best to deliver them as quickly as possible without rushing them, because that's what leads to mistakes and the videos not being as good as I want them to be. And just to be clear right now, these will be extended edition versions, since they're usually considered the definitive versions of the films, thus I believe it makes the most amount of sense to analyze them. This won't be a full-on comparison between the 2, but I'll bring it up every once in a while when I believe it's warranted. So, without further ado, time to break down the beginning of this journey with Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. To start the movie off, we are introduced to this narration from Cate Blanchett. The filmmakers debate between Ian McKellen and Elijah Wood to narrate, but they ultimately decide on Cate. And considering the agelessness of elves and her strong and powerful voice, I believe this was a solid choice.
He poured his cruelty, his malice, and his will to dominate all life.
Her narration is fantastic, and it's striking in all the right ways. In the actual narration, she remarks how the world is changing. She can feel it in the air, so much that was is lost, and none live that remember it, contextualizing why she's providing the prologue, so it doesn't feel like it's just for the audience, even though that is the most obvious intention for it. She explains that it all began with the forging of the Great Rings. 3 for the elves, the wisest of all beings, 7 for the dwarves, the great miners and craftsmen for the mountain halls, and 9 for the race of man, who above else desire power. But all of them were deceived. In the land of Mordor, in the fires of Mount Doom, the Dark Lord Sauron forged in secret the Master Ring to control all others. He poured his cruelty, his malice, and his will to dominate all life into the ring. One ring to rule them all. I just want to say right quick, they did a fantastic job designing Sauron. He leaves quite the impression, even though we only see him in this form for this one scene, but he looks amazing. He's tall, menacing, intimidating, and his armor looks cool with the spikes and the black color palette without looking too edgy in my opinion. They even took his armor and dipped it in some acid to give this more withered look. And his helmet is sculpted after a horse skull, and after looking at one, I can see the resemblance. And that's how above and beyond they went just for this one armor set. And this is only the beginning of the praise for the production of these movies. One by one, the free lands of Middle-earth fell to the power of the ring, but there were some who resisted. A last alliance of men and elves marched to the slopes of Mount Doom, and there they fought for the freedom of Middle-earth. We get these quick shots of the orcs, and they look incredible. The orcs, for the most part, outside the obvious massive VFX shots, were actual guys in makeup and prosthetics, and they look so good. I've heard that Peter Jackson has said he prefers the VFX orcs in the Hobbit movies, but I have to completely disagree here. They honestly look far better. Even over 20 years later, they still age very well. Now I don't envy the guys who have to wait hours just to put the stuff on. And the armor for the elves and men also looks great. For these movies, there are over 45,000 props made for all the armor and weapons, or anything else that was used, and that talent didn't go to waste. The elves' armor I especially like, since you can see that they resemble leaves if you look closely enough, which reflects their fondness for nature in a cool yet subtle way. The action is also awesome. All of it went during the orcs charging. The elves are so coordinated, they could shoot pinpoint past their front lines without hitting anybody. And when the orcs reached them, the front lines were able to just mow them down nearly effortlessly, showing the power and skill of the elves. Overall, I think starting off with a short battle is a solid way to get the audience hooked on the movie, while providing the context necessary to understand what is going on and why. That's not even mentioning the amazing score by Howard Shore that's playing. Let's just say that the music in this trilogy is straight fire. While victory was near, the power of the ring could not be undone. Sauron walks in and starts decimating the Alliance with mere swipes. He's able to wipe out dozens of them at a time. Elendil attempts to charge at Sauron, only to be met with the same fate as the others before him. His son Isildur rushes to his aid, but is no use. It was at this moment where all hope had faded, but Isildur took up his father's sword. To start with the criticisms levied against these movies, there are two that I've seen. To start with the film itself, I've seen people say the way that Isildur defeats Sauron is stupid. Particularly, Sauron reaches out toward Isildur, exposing the ring, which allows Isildur the chance to cut off his fingers. I think when people say this, they're kind of looking at it from the back seat, not thinking about it from Sauron's perspective. Think about it. Sauron's currently winning, has just killed one of the main leaders of the Alliance. So far, he's been unstoppable. That will surely play into his arrogance, where he believes that he is truly invincible, and nothing can hurt him. He simply underestimates Isildur and his father's sword. And while even though it is broken, it isn't an ordinary sword, as we'll see as these movies progress. Someone might say it's not directly established that Sauron is arrogant, but we are told he has the goal to dominate all life. That in and of itself implies a high level of arrogance, to have the aspiration to rule over everyone and everything. So I think it is justified, based on the past 4 minutes of the movie already. The other criticism is an adaptational one, and that it does not show the full fight between Sauron against both Elendil and even the Elden King, Gil-galad, like in the book, claiming that the movie version is too condensed and anticlimactic. But a common through line going through these types of criticism is time. The prologue is almost 8 minutes long as it is. Any more and you risk overflowing the audience with too much information, or dragging out scenes that aren't necessary. We already have everything we need from what is provided. Like they did plan to include a longer version of the duel, among other things, such as Sauron using his blood to forge the ring, which is why he has a dagger when we see him in Mount Doom, but the filmmakers had to trim it down for time. They discussed how difficult it was for them to incorporate the prologue into the movie, to where they even planned to not even have one at one point in time, but ultimately decided that one was necessary. And for what time they did have, they did a fantastic job. Proceeding for the rest of the prologue, Sauron explodes into this massive shockwave that pushes everyone off their feet. Sauron, the enemy of the free peoples of Middle-earth, was defeated. The ring passed to Isildur, who had his one chance to destroy evil forever. But the hearts of men are easily corrupted. Isildur takes the ring for himself, for it has a will of his own. But while riding on horseback, he and his company are ambushed by orcs. Realizing they're being overrun, Isildur slips the ring on, and we see that it turns him invisible. He tries to swim, but the ring betrays Isildur by slipping off his fingers. The orcs spot him and snipe him with their bows. I've seen people say he should have clenched his fist to prevent it from slipping off, but A, that's not how swimming works, and B, he's running for his life in a panic. Most people aren't going to be thinking the most logically when in a situation like this, so I think it's perfectly acceptable. To close the prologue, the ring was lost to the river for over 2,500 years, passing out of all knowledge, until it ensnared a new bearer, a creature named Gollum, who kept it in the Misty Mountains for 500 years, with his lifespan being unnaturally extended. It eventually abandoned Gollum, but unintentionally, it was picked up by an unlikely creature, a hobbit, Bilbo Baggins of the Shire, for the time will soon come when hobbits will shape the fortunes of all. So, that was the entire prologue. What an amazing way to open a movie. We're given important context of the world and some of its characters already. We're introduced to several of the races and the main villain with some nice spectacle on top. While there are other ways to introduce an audience to the world of a movie, I don't think they could have done any better, and we've already had this much to talk about. This is definitely going to be a long one, so grab some second breakfast or something. The movie proceeds to show a map of Middle-earth, ending with the camera hovering above Hobbiton. We're introduced to Bilbo Baggins from the prologue, played by Ian Holm, who you might recognize as Ash from the first Alien movie. It was also Bilbo in the BBC adaptation for Lord of the Rings, so he already has some familiarity in the role. In his house, Baggin at the Shire, he mutters to himself that it's the third age of this world, as we're given the subtitle of the movie, The Fellowship of the Ring. Bilbo is writing his book, There and Back Again, A Hobbit's Tale. He writes a chapter titled Concerning Hobbits. Here he explains hobbits as a race. As farmers of the Shire, content of ignoring and being ignored by the big folk of the world, they're not particularly renowned as warriors or even being very wise, while showing some pretty funny clips of hobbits being pretty lazy or stupid. But the hobbits as a whole have a love of farming and things that grow, while showing one hobbit in particular, Samwise Gamgee, tending to his gardening duties. This is an extended edition add-on too. In the theatrical version, we're told that Sam's a gardener, but never really shown it, so I like that they managed to get his small snippet of this character into this version. Bilbo claims there's nothing wrong with celebrating a simple life. Originally, the prologue was going to be about the hobbits, much like in the book, but I think the actual one we got works better in the context of a movie. While saving this mini prologue about the hobbits here works to set up the Shire as a place of great importance for the main characters, since this ultimately was at stake for them later on. There's knocking at the door, and Bilbo shouts at Frodo to answer it, but there's no response. We're introduced to Frodo lying next to a tree, reading a book. Christopher Tolkien, the son of J.R.R. Tolkien, is infamously known for not liking these movies, going as far as to claim that one of the actors was miscast. While he never outright said who, it's often speculated that he was referring to Elijah Wood as Frodo. The reason is that Frodo is 33 at the start of the novel and 50 after the first chapter. Elijah Wood was only 18 when they started filming for these movies, so he's much younger than his novel portrayal. But while there is a case to be made they should have made Frodo older, I think that Elijah plays the role amazingly throughout these movies, and I'll explain why I'm fine with the age discrepancy in a little bit. Proceeding with the film itself, I like Frodo's introduction, showing him as this laid-back hobbit who enjoys his peace and quiet, and we learn that he's waiting to meet with the wizard Gandalf the Grey, played by the excellently cast Ian McKellen. Frodo tells Gandalf he's late, only for Gandalf to rebut that a wizard is never late, nor early. He arrives precisely when he needs to. They stare for a second, they laugh, and Frodo flies himself to hug Gandalf, which is a nice moment to introduce their friendship, considering how important it is in this movie, and the movie makes sure to make every second count. The way they managed to make the hobbits work is also great. Obviously, it's pretty hard to find a bunch of hobbit-sized actors for these roles, so they incorporated several clever tricks to make that happen. While most movies nowadays might just use scale compositing and green screens, completely separated from everyone else, and while these movies use that sometimes, such as this shot, they use many other techniques. They often use hobbit-sized scale doubles, such as this shot with Frodo facing away from the camera, or very large scale doubles, such as when Frodo hugs a much larger Gandalf, and sometimes the scale doubles use these masks that resemble the main actors' faces in several long-distance shots. They made two different sets of back end, a small one for the larger actors to give the impression that they're in a small house, or a very large set to make the hobbit actors appear small, as well as a technique called forced perspective, which is where there'll be two more actors, some are closer to the camera with others further away from it, and the camera is faced in such a way that it appears they're two different sizes. Stuff like this is why I found the behind the scenes commentary so fascinating, because it's honestly interesting seeing how the movies are made in a way that isn't just green screen land all the time, and watching them changes how you perceive the movies and gain an extra layer of appreciation for them. Sure, it wouldn't mean as much if the overall writing was bad, but as you might guess, that isn't the case at all in these movies. Frodo and Gandalf riding his carriage to the Shire, which is simply a place out in the countryside that they found and excavated a bit to make the set there, which is still there to this very day as a tourist attraction. New Zealand is very proud to have these movies filmed there, since it's a very popular place for tourists to visit, and it makes sense that people basically think of New Zealand as Middle-earth nowadays.
New Zealand, that's where they made Lord of the Rings.
Back to the writing, Bilbo concludes this section, claiming there's always been a Baggins living under Bag End, and there always will be, foreshadowing the unfortunate tragedy that is set to happen when these movies end. Frodo claims Bilbo has been acting odder than usual, with him poring over his maps in his study, and while this is happening, Bilbo is starting to freak out over losing something, only to reach into his pocket to find it, the ring, further showing the effect it has on its bearers and its power to change their will to become obsessed with it. Frodo deduces that Bilbo and Gandalf are up to something, and Gandalf tries to feign innocence, but Frodo is clever enough to know that he's playing here. He goes on to say that Gandalf has been labeled a disturber of the peace since forcing Bilbo to go on this adventure with him, with Gandalf claiming that all he did was give Bilbo a bit of a nudge out the door. Once again, this is really good camaraderie between the two, and the actors play off each other pretty well. This is good exposition about the adventure that Bilbo went on, which enabled him to find the ring, which fills in for the audience on the story of The Hobbit, for those who haven't read the book or seen the movies, which weren't even out yet. We get this cute scene of the Hobbit children wanting Gandalf to use his fireworks, initially being disappointed, only for Gandalf to use some of his magic, the first time we see in these movies, to use some of the smaller ones. The kids cheer, and one of the older hobbits laughs, only to stop upon gaze of disapproval from his wife. Man, I feel sorry for you. Frodo leaves the cart, telling Gandalf he's glad he's back, with Gandalf saying he is as well, even repeating it to himself quietly. Gandalf passes by the gate that says no admittance unless on party business. He knocks on the door. Bilbo says no thank you to any visitors or well-wishers or distant relations.
And what about very old friends?
They hug each other, and Gandalf remarks on how despite Bilbo being 111 years old, he hasn't aged a day. And while inside, Gandalf is bumping his head on stuff. And the last reaction wasn't even supposed to happen, but Ian McKellen stayed in character so well they decided to keep the reaction in the movie. Gandalf picks up the map of the Lonely Mountain from the Hobbit, and we get more character bonding between the two, with Bilbo attempting to hide from the Sackville Baggins, who wanted his house, which is a recurring gag in these movies and from the books, which I like that they carried over here. While Bilbo serves tea, they discuss their plan and that Frodo suspects it. Gandalf reminds him that Frodo is very fond of him, and Bilbo states that Frodo would go with him if he knew. And considering what's about to happen, it's important to establish the relationship between the two. Bilbo is tugging at his shirt pocket, explaining that while he doesn't look his age, he's beginning to feel it, like butter scraped over too much bread, that he needs a holiday, a very long holiday where he'll never return. All this indicates that the ring has had a long-term effect on Bilbo by having it for the past 60 years, and that it truly indeed affects the wearer in ways they can't even imagine. This also sets up a key important decision that happens at the end, and these subtle hints like this are sprinkled all over these movies. The more you watch these movies, the more you tend to notice the brilliant writing throughout. Bilbo and Gandalf bond further smoking pipes, with Gandalf forming these smoke rings and even a ship that flies through it. Bilbo caps off the scene by saying this will be a night to remember. We cut to the festivities where everyone's having a good time. We're reintroduced to Sam, or introduced, depending on which version we're talking about. Frodo encourages Sam to dance with Rosie Cotton, but he's too nervous to, claiming he's going to have another drink of ale, until Frodo, being the good friend that he is, pushes him towards Rosie. Since this is the first interaction between these two, it's also important, much like all the other dynamics, that we see these two together, and this isn't a bad way to introduce that. Bilbo is telling these Hobbit children, two of whom are Peter Jackson's kids, who we see more of this trilogy, about his journey where he and the dwarves are kidnapped by trolls who want to cook them. Once again, being nice bits of fan service for fans of The Hobbit, and we see these two mischievous hobbits, Meriadoc Brandybuck and Peregrine Took, or Merry and Pippin for short, take some of Gandalf's fireworks when he's distracted entertaining the other children. Bilbo is talking to the Hobbit mother, who's been hard at work producing a lot of children, only for him to hear that the Sackville Baggins are closing in. He hides in his tent with Frodo. He tells Frodo that he was very selfish when he took him in after his parents died, and it wasn't out of charity, but rather it's because Frodo had much more spirit than the other Baggins. Frodo asks if he's been drinking at the Gaffer's home brew. Bilbo says yes, but that's not the point. He takes a pause, then abruptly finishes that he'll be alright. I've seen criticism that this dialogue is blunt because Bilbo is telling Frodo things that they already know, like him telling him that he took him in after his parents died. That's missing the point. The point is that Bilbo is trying to tell Frodo about him leaving, but he just can't bring himself to do it, which is why he tells Frodo he'll be alright at the end of it. In fact, this scene accomplishes multiple things. First, this is the only time, especially in the extended cut, that Frodo and Bilbo interact before he leaves, making the relationship far stronger in this version. It also adds some comic relief, but it also gives a bit of context as to why Frodo lives with Bilbo. It does a solid job of giving us what we need to know about these two before they split apart, which is important for some of the later beats of the story. Merry and Pippin light a dragon firework inside a tent, and they have a brief argument about being inside the tent and on the ground until it goes off and creates a large dragon, It's so lifelike that the people start to freak out, and Bilbo, when told by Frodo to take cover, is in disbelief that dragons haven't been in those parts in 1,000 years. The dragon flies up and a large explosion made out of very solid VFX happens, and the crowd cheers. The Misfits want to light another one, but Gandalf starts to twist their ears and introduces the audience to their names. He punishes them by making them wash dishes. So far, our impression of them is that they're just a bunch of misfits, but they become so much more as these movies progress. It was kind of controversial from the Tolkien fanbase to make these two as comic relief characters, but as I said, they develop much more when we go along, which I will quantify. The crowd demands a speech from Bilbo. He goes on stage and he shouts out all the hobbits' names, ending with the Proudfoots, with one of the correct names to be Proud Feet. And the way that Proudfoot is framed is very similar to the anime version of The Lord of the Rings by Ralph Bakshi. That movie was Peter Jackson's introduction to the franchise, and it's nice to pay homage to past adaptations. And there are far more to come in this movie in particular. Anyway, Bilbo starts with a speech that's ripped straight from the book.
Half as well as I should like, and I like less than half of you half as well as you deserve.
After a moment of silence, he starts stuttering and pausing again. He grabs his pocket, announces that this is the end, and bids them farewell.
Goodbye.
For those watching the theatrical version, this is the first time the ring is used since that moment when the seal door was cut. But I would say that the theatrical version makes for an impactful moment when not having seen the ring's power already. With the crowd in shock and horror, Bilbo heads back to his house laughing, with Gandalf already there waiting for him.
I suppose you think that was terribly clever.
He lectures Bilbo how there are many magical rings in the world, and none of them are to be used lightly. So it's confirmed in these movies that there are more magical rings in the world than just the 20 Rings of Power, so much for that being a plot hole in the Hobbit movies. He asks Gandalf to look after Frodo, reinforcing his love for him. He claims that he's leaving everything for Frodo, including the ring. He claims it's on an envelope in the mantelpiece, only to learn he still has it in his pocket. But he starts having second thoughts about leaving it. Gandalf urges him to give it up, but Bilbo snaps at him, claiming that if he's angry, it's Gandalf's fault. He then says this.
It's mine. My precious.
Gandalf remarks that name has been used, but not by Bilbo. This causes Bilbo to get even angrier, telling Gandalf he only wants it for himself, only for Gandalf to darken the room with his voice, growing to be very deep, creating a very visually striking moment.
Do not take me for some conjurer of cheap tricks. I am not trying to rob you. I'm trying to help you.
Bilbo hugs Gandalf in guilt and shame. Gandalf asks Bilbo to trust him as he did before, harkening back to the days of the Hobbit, telling us just how large their friendship is. Bilbo concedes that the ring must go to Frodo. He opens the door to leave, but Gandalf stops him, reminding Bilbo what he just said. Bilbo takes his hand out with the ring, and from both the music, in-Holmes acting, and just the visual storytelling itself, we can see just how hard it is to let it go. As Bilbo tips his hand over, the ring sticks to it as if some sort of adhesiveness. And when it hits the ground, the impact makes it seem as though it's a very heavy object, despite being so small. It doesn't spin or anything that you would expect a normal ring to do. It just drops with a thud.
I thought this was conceptually brilliant. I remember reading this again. This was in your treatment, Peter, that the ring doesn't just fall, it almost adheres.
It almost sticks to the palm of his hand, and then it only reluctantly. And then when the ring lands, we wanted to put this big, heavy sound effect on, so it goes thump like it weighs a hell of a lot more than what it really should.
They even magnetized the floor to allow the ring to drop this way, which is pretty cool and creative. Bilbo claims to have found a way to end his book, saying that he lived happily ever after. Gandalf bids him farewell, and Bilbo leaves singing merrily. Gandalf heads back inside, attempts to pick up the ring, where this happens. Something is clearly wrong. Gandalf at the fireplace reflects on what Bilbo said. Frodo heads inside and finds out that Bilbo left. Gandalf says that Bilbo is going to stay with the elves, and he's left everything and bag in to Frodo. He asks for the ring, Frodo puts it in the envelope, with Gandalf swiftly closing it as soon as humanly possible. He is terrified of what the ring could potentially be, and he doesn't want it to affect Frodo the same way it did Bilbo. Gandalf says he's going to find questions that need answering. Frodo claims that he doesn't understand, with Gandalf saying the same. These series of events are excellently building the tension because we know what the ring is, but the characters don't. With Gandalf, our wisest and most mature character, being afraid of it. But the tension doesn't stop here, however. We cut to Mordor for the first time since the prologue, and we see the Tower of Barad-dûr. According to Peter Jackson, the scaffolding we see on the tower is the orcs rebuilding it.
See this tower in the second film, in the third movie, it's actually finished. This is only like a third of the way as high as what it ultimately reaches. The
The enemy is rebuilding, and from the looks of it, they're very close to completion. The music is once again top-notch, and the VFX and the bigature, yes, that's an actual term, and yes, they've built these 15-foot miniatures of still locations from the movies, and they look incredible. We hear these shrieking cries, and the arms of someone clearly in pain shout out only 2 words. Mount Doom erupts, almost as if reacting to the information. And in Minas Morgul, a location we won't be seeing for a while, the doors open, releasing these 9 Black Riders. Gandalf on his horse arrives at Minas Tirith, capital of Gondor, another extremely important location for these movies. And as we see, it's right next to Mordor. He heads inside to his archive that's full of books and scrolls. He looks through the memoirs of Isildur. As Gandalf reads through, you can see moments that recount what we see in the prologue when Isildur retrieves the ring. He claims that it is precious to him, just like Bilbo. And one very subtle detail that a lot may not know is that when we see the new shot of Isildur with the ring in his fingers, we can see the ring is shrinking to fit its new host. That's an amazing attention to detail that's just subtly in the movie, and explains not only why characters as small as Bilbo to someone as large as Sauron can fit the ring, but also how the ring managed to slip off Isildur's hands in the prologue. Questions that some may have had have been answered, and it's nice to see that the movie doesn't directly call attention to this and trust its audience to know its details. You also learn that the writing on the ring used to be as clear as day, but it disappears, unless when directly exposed to fire. We see a farmer chopping wood at his house. One of the Black Riders gallops next to him. The dog tries to bark at him, but is so terrified it backpedals inside. The rider, voiced by Andy Serkis, repeats the same 2 words we heard at Barad-dûr. The farmer, also visibly terrified, tells him that Baggins is in the Shire in Hobbiton. This is our first introduction to the riders, and it doesn't disappoint, showing the fear and dread that just one of them can exude. Cut to a scene at Green Dragon Inn where Merry and Pippin are singing, making this the first time the 4 hobbits we've gotten to know so far share the same scene, showing us their friendship. We get some world building where some hobbits mention that dwarves and other strange folk are crossing nearby the Shire, and we get a bit of romantic tension between Sam and Rosie, the last that we see for a very long time, so further setup now isn't bad. We get this one scene when they are trying to leave the tavern, and one guy's attempting to sweet talk her to Sam's dismay. When Frodo tells Sam that Rosie can see an idiot when she sees one, Sam asks, "Does she?" in a concerned manner, indicating that he believes himself to be an idiot, which, as we see across these movies, isn't true. Frodo enters his house, and we get this creepy build-up only for Gandalf to jump scare him, asking the ring is secret and safe. He is so unkempt that it appears that he's been hastily traveling there as fast as he could, with no regard for sleep. He takes the envelope and throws it into the fireplace. Frodo asks what he is doing. Gandalf takes some tongs, tells Frodo to open his hand, for the ring is quite cool. He drops it, and sure enough, Frodo's hands aren't even burned by it. Gandalf asks if he sees anything on the ring. Frodo initially says no, and for a brief moment, Gandalf has a look of relief on his face. Maybe all this worrying was for nothing. But Frodo then says he does see something. The writing on the ring, the same writing as we've seen before. Frodo claims that he can't read it, only for Gandalf to say that there are few who can. The language is the black speech from Mordor. He then recites what the markings mean.
One ring to rule them all. One ring to find them. One ring to bring them all. And in the darkness, fight them.
This is the One Ring, and this is the moment when the characters and audience feel the impending sense of dread for what is about to come from a device of such unspeakable evil. So far, the film has done an excellent job building up the tension and suspense, and the pacing has also been excellent for building up to this grand adventure that we're about to embark on. Gandalf briefly reiterates to Frodo the backstory of the ring and how it's prolonged Bilbo's life. Originally, this thing would have contained the entire story as we saw in the prologue, much like how the book covers it, but as I said earlier, I think it was the smart decision to explain that at the beginning, so that way for the movie audience who never read the books can get the essentials first. And this brief exchange is mainly meant to refresh on that information as a reminder. Frodo claims that Sauron was destroyed, only for there to be a brief moment of silence from the two as the ring starts whispering in black speech. The voice of the ring is provided by Alan Howard, who voices a certain other character of these movies that we'll be getting to. He does a great job giving this eerie and malevolent character to the ring, despite it not even speaking a language that the audience can understand. Gandalf explained that Sauron's spirit has endured, his orcs have multiplied, that he and the ring are bound to each other. It must never be found. Frodo then attempts to hide the ring and claims they must never speak of it again, for no one else knows about it. only to be met with silence from Gandalf. He then explains he looked everywhere for Gollum, but the enemy found him first, and they tortured him for an unspecified period of time. Among the shrieks of pain, Gollum was only able to give the enemy 2 words: Shire Baggins. Frodo realizes that's going to lead them straight there. We cut to a hobbit asking who goes there, while 2 of the riders are galloping along the road, only for the hobbit to come face to face with one of their swords. The momentum just keeps on building and suspense along with it. To address one pretty massive change that's made to this part of the story, the amount of time that Gandalf takes to learn all this information is far shorter in the film. In the book, it takes 17 years, while here it only seems to take a few weeks. Basically the amount of time it takes to travel from the Shire to Minas Tirith and back on horseback. But this is honestly an understandable change, because as I've been alluding to, the film has been building up this sense of urgency and suspense up to this point, and having Gandalf take 17 years to collect all this information would kind of kill that. In the book, it is mentioned in the Council of Elrond chapter that Gandalf did go to Minas Tirith to collect some of the information, so I think this is a nice way to adapt this into a movie format. I think he's also one of the reasons why Frodo is made to be younger in these movies. As I said earlier, Frodo starts as 33 in the book, sharing the same birthday as Bilbo, even though that's omitted in the films, to 50 after the time gap. That would be a lot hard to pull off in the movie with actors and all of that, so it makes sense to cast someone who is younger. Plus, in the book, the ring does preserve Frodo's age, so he does look younger than what he actually is, so I think that adds even more reasoning to the casting decision. And I think that Elijah Wood is just such a good actor that it's fine that they made this choice. Frodo offers Gandalf the ring, but he refuses. He's wise enough to know what the ring can and will do to him if he does accept it. He will use it for the desire to do good, but through him, it will wield a terrible power, showing that Gandalf is wise and isn't someone who seeks power, unlike another character we'll meet in the not-too-distant future. They agree that the ring can't stay in the Shire, so Frodo starts packing, and Gandalf orders Frodo to head to Bree at the end of the Prancing Pony, to travel only by day and avoid the roads. Frodo claims he's good at cross-country and puts the ring in his pocket. Gandalf, amazed by Frodo's courage, has this touchy speech that hobbits are amazing creatures, and that you can learn everything about the hobbits in a day, but even after 100 years, they'll still surprise you. Not only does this incorporate Tolkien's dialogue very well, but from a character perspective, it shows that not even someone as wise and old as Gandalf knows everything about the world and its people, and he's humble enough to admit that. There's this noise coming from outside the bushes, and when Gandalf pulls the assailant from the outside, it turns out to be none other than Samwise Gamgee eavesdropping on them. He claims he hasn't been dropping any eaves on them, and that he's just been cutting grass near the window at night, showing that he's not a very good liar. He just happens to have overheard their conversation about a Dark Lord and the end of the world. Sam begs Gandalf not to turn him to anything unnatural, but Gandalf claims he has a better use for him. The next morning, the three make their way into the woods. Before he departs, Gandalf informs Frodo that the enemy has many spies in their service. He tells Frodo never to put it on, for the agents of the Dark Lord are drawn to its power. The ring has a will of its own, it wants to be found. This sets up the ring as the extension of Sauron, a way of keeping him as a method of opposition for the heroes, reinforced by the eerie music, telling us it's not some sort of ordinary MacGuffin device that we're used to in fantasy stories, but instead, it's a character. Gandalf leads on his horse and rides off. Frodo and Sam, who are the main duo of these movies going forward, march on this montage where we get these very pretty landscape shots and scenery. At this cornfield, Sam stops and exclaims that one more step is the furthest away from home he'll ever be. This is a great character moment for him, showing that he's inexperienced with the larger world, much like all the other hobbits. Frodo conversely encourages him to move on. He recounts a saying that Bilbo used to tell him about keeping your feet, or otherwise he'll be swept off the road, which transitioned from Frodo's to Bilbo's voice. This reiterates that Frodo does take after Bilbo, as we've been told that he has a more adventurous spirit, unlike all the other hobbits. And as some people have pointed out, there used to be a car in this background shot somewhere around here, but that's just a nitpick and it's not even there anymore, so it's no big deal. So far, that's about the only flaw I've been able to find in this movie, and we're 45 minutes in. Sam is cooking dinner while Frodo's resting in a tree. They hear the singing that's not too far off. It turns out to be elves heading to the Grey Havens, leaving Middle-earth never to return. This sets up an important plot point that is prevalent in all these movies. It's a bit of an homage to a part of the books where Frodo and Sam find a group of elves led by Gildor and rest with them for the night. I also love these glow effects they give to the elves in these movies. It gives them this ethereal quality, making them appear outerworldly and angelic, much like how Tolkien describes them. Plus, the singing from them is stellar as well. The pair begin to sleep in the woods. Sam is struggling to get comfortable lying on his back in the roots, while Frodo is sleeping effortlessly. Sam even claims he's not going to get any sleep there, and Frodo claims that he won't either when he clearly is, lying to comfort Sam. This highlights the contrast between the two of them. Sam is akin to the other hobbits, where he's never traveled outside the Shire in their lives, while Frodo is basically like Bilbo, being more adventurous and more adaptable to the outside world. This is how you characterize your characters, people. Things seem fine and well until we see another rider and his horse. They're still out there, and remain as this ever-looming threat. Gandalf is making haste as we see him arrive at Isengard at the Tower of Orthanc, where he's very good at tracking and overhead shots. If you look behind the scenes, we see that this was planned with these rough animations they used as the base for this scene, among many others in this trilogy, to get the shots that they wanted. I like this level of thought and planning that goes into these movies, because it's nice watching a movie that has this much level of effort, as opposed to watching movies that had no thought or planning put into them at all. We're introduced to Saruman the White, perfectly cast as the man, myth, and legend himself, Christopher Lee. I don't think I need to describe the awesomeness of this man, because a simple search of his history will tell you all that. But to describe the Lord of the Rings trivia that surrounds him, he originally auditioned to play Gandalf since he was a massive fan of the novels, being the only person out of everyone who worked on these movies that had met Tolkien before he passed, and that was purely by chance at a pub. But he couldn't play the role of Gandalf due to the more action-heavy requirements that would take, such as fighting or horseback riding due to his age, but instead he was offered the role of Saruman instead. And to get this out of the way right now, he, along with Ian McKellen, as well as another actor we haven't met yet, are the most perfect casting decisions in this trilogy. I consider the casting perfect in these movies, but these three are the most perfect in my mind. And to think that Saruman was almost played by Jeremy Irons, who instead took a role in the Dungeons & Dragons movie a year prior.
You don't like that, do you? Good. I can use every ounce of your rage.
Saruman greets Gandalf as a friend, showing that they have a history together. They walk through the trees where Gandalf informs Saruman that the ring has been found, and it's been hidden under his very nose this whole time. Saruman claims that the love for the halfling's leaf has slowed Gandalf's mind, which is funny considering what we learned in the next movie, but I digress. Gandalf claims they may still have enough time to counter Sauron, only for Saruman to ask what time do they have. Inside Orthanc, Saruman explains that Sauron, while unable to gather his physical form, has managed to regain much of his strength. He is gathering an army massive enough to invade all of Middle-earth. Gandalf asks how he knows all this, and in the central room, Gandalf tells Saruman that the Palantir, an ancient seeing stone, is dangerous and not all of them are accounted for. He covers it back with a cloth, only to once again see a flash of the flaming eye. Saruman informs Gandalf that Sauron's forces are already moving. The 9 riders in black cross the River Isen on Midsummer's Eve. They will find the ring and kill the one who carries it. Gandalf tries to leave to get to Frodo, only for Saruman to close all the doors telepathically. He offers Gandalf the choice to join Sauron, but his only response from Gandalf is how Saruman the Wise can have been the reason for madness. Saruman has given up hope. This is what I believe is what we're supposed to get out of this scene. Despite what we've been told about Saruman being the wisest and most powerful of the Wizarding Order, he has fallen to hopelessness and despair. His use of the Palantir has corrupted his mind with visions of impending doom, and instead of doing what he can to stop it, he joins the enemy. As we learn later on in this movie, he hopes to share his power with Sauron. This gives us a great reading on the character of Saruman. He's essentially a foil to Gandalf. In contrast, Gandalf is hopeful, optimistic, and ultimately selfless. Saruman, on the other hand, has all the opposite values. Gandalf has a clear love for all those beneath himself, as we see in the Hobbits, but Saruman views himself as superior to all of them. From what we see in this dialogue, he ultimately gives in his craving for power, one of the main themes of the story that only get more explored as we progress. This is a fantastic introduction for Saruman, especially since he's essentially the secondary antagonist in this trilogy, and the acting from Christopher Lee is simply top-notch.
Against the power of Mordor, there can be no victory.
A battle between the two ensues. There's not much to break down here, since it's mainly just 2 old men using the Force to push each other. If you're looking for something more flashy, you might be disappointed in this fight, but Peter Jackson has said he doesn't really like using magic in these films, so this is kind of his workaround for that. But I think it works for what it is. I honestly like the more restraint that's on play for this fight, and it gives it a more down-to-earth kind of feel, especially with these really good sound effects that give this cracking noise whenever they get hit. Production-wise, they mainly use stuntmen for this scene, which is easy to do considering these are just 2 guys with beards. But during shooting, one of the stuntmen was supposed to land on a trampoline, but hit the back of their head on the middle part. This is the first mention of the many injuries that took place on set during the filming process, and you'll be surprised by some of the injuries that took place. The scene ends with Saruman winning, scolding Gandalf for not joining him, and throwing him up to the top of the roof, with the film dramatically cutting to the hobbits in the cornfields, serving as a pretty solid cliffhanger, making the audience wonder what's going to happen to Gandalf, and what's going to happen now that he can't meet with the hobbits. Take notes, Rings of Power, on how to do cliffhanger as well without being a way that is totally manipulative. Speaking of the hobbits, Sam is looking for Frodo, only for him to be right there. Worried that he almost lost him, Sam tells Frodo the promise Gandalf asked of him not to lose Frodo, showing his commitment. Frodo claims they're still in the Shire. What could possibly happen? Right on cue, Merry and Pippin bump into them with all sorts of vegetables, having stolen from Farmer Maggot's crop. He makes his way towards them with his scythe and dogs. The four start running away, and the two troublemakers claim that he's overreacting, and they list all the things they've been stealing from Maggot, telling us just how long they've been committing this type of behavior. They stumble down the hill, and there's some comedic reaction of Pippin barely avoiding the mud, or at least I hope it was just mud, and Merry having broken something, only for it to have been a carrot. The comedic timing from Billy Boyd and Dominic Monaghan is on point, as they have been so far, and they work pretty well off of each other. This was another site of a workplace injury, the first one in fact, when one of the doubles dislocated a shoulder and needed to go to the hospital for it. I hope these guys get paid well for the services they provide to give us these movies. While the others are gathering mushrooms, Frodo hears his voice from far off, only for it to turn these piercing shrieks. Frodo yells at them to get off the road. They hide under a tree, and one of the riders shows up on his horse. What follows is a very tense and nerve-wracking scene, the rider dismounting from his horse and placing his hand right on top of the hobbits. And one detail I picked up on that I never considered until watching the director's commentary is the shots we see of the bugs and insects leaving the ground and the tree is the fear that the rider is exhibiting. The aura of fear is so great that the mere presence of the rider is enough to cause the life nearby to flee in terror.
Yeah, you had earlier, wasn't it, about the disturbance of nature at the presence of the rider.
Yeah, I don't know how well it comes across in the movie. The idea was that as soon as this black rider appears, all the insects flee. They basically just run away. And I don't quite know whether that comes across like that, but I guess it's sort of interesting.
It does.
That is an amazing detail, and it goes to show that there are plenty of things in art that can go unnoticed, but when it is noticed, you gain just that much more appreciation from it. The scene gets even more tense as the Black Speech from the Ring is whispering to Frodo, and he contemplates putting it on, but Sam stops him, remembering what Gandalf said. Merry distracts the rider by tossing their bag of mushrooms, and they take off. These screams came from Fran Walsh herself. She happened to have a throat infection one day, they tested it out, and decided to use it for the movies. This iconic scream is attributed to her, and by mere chance. I honestly doubt there could have been any other sound they could have used that would have topped this. It's nighttime now, and Merry knows that the Black Rider is looking for something, or someone, and asks Frodo, only to be interrupted by even more screams. Frodo tells them they need to get to Bree, with Merry offering them to Buckleberry Ferry. What follows is another tense scene with them running for their lives from the rider, and three of them make their way onto the ferry, but Frodo's the last one running with the horse almost on his heels. As the ferry is floating away, Frodo makes his jump, which was actually performed by Elijah Wood with no doubles or cables or anything, and they're safe. This is another great scene. The music, lighting, sound design, and action are firing on all cylinders here. They begin to make their way to Brandywine Bridge, 20 miles away, and we see that there are even more riders pursuing them. Now, before we begin about their arrival at Bree, we gotta talk about him. For those who know the books, you know who I'm referring to. Tom Bombadil. For those not in the loop, Bombadil is a character that the hobbits meet around this time of the story in the woods. They meet him and his wife Goldberry, and there are some lighthearted antics in the story for a couple of chapters, and they head off to Bree. Some are really upset that he was excluded entirely from the films, though honestly, I do think it's for the best for two reasons. For starters, it will disrupt the pacing and suspense that have been expertly built up so far to a grinding halt. Going from the writers hunting the characters to messing around Tom's house would be jarring from a tonal and pacing perspective. It will also eat up the film's precious runtime. Yes, I get that this is a long movie, but movies, even at their longest, still aren't able to adapt everything, especially from a book as dense as Lord of the Rings. As Peter Jackson has said in one of his behind-the-scenes interviews, if you try to adapt a book exactly as it is into a movie, it will be a mess. Not because the book is bad, but rather the pacing of books and movies are totally different. And he's right. So Bombadil is one of the sacrifices that had to be made for these films. Plus, and this is reason number 2, Tom kind of clashes one of the main themes of Lord of the Rings if you really think about it. In the book, when Tom puts out the ring, nothing happens. To him, it's like any other ring. He is so ambivalent to everything that the ring is meaningless to him. I'm not a fan of this because it conflicts with the central ideas that absolute power can and will corrupt any person, so having a guy who is straight up immune to the ring entirely is a mistake. I know they give a reason as to why he can't take the ring to Mount Doom, but that still doesn't change the impact he has thematically. I know it likely made some Tolkien diehards upset, but these are my honest thoughts, and I'm not here to lie in this review. I'm just here to give my thoughts, and that's what I'm going to do. I think this is honestly the reason why, in most adaptations, Bombadil is usually cut. The only adaptations he's been in, besides any video games, is the 1955 BBC radio drama, the finished version, and Rings of Power Season 2. Look guys, I don't like having to bring up that show up, but I had no choice in this instance. Sorry about that, let's just move on. Back to the film, the hobbits arrive at Bree, and there's a nice detail where the gate guard has to use the lower hall to see the hobbits, since it shows that the place is close enough to the Shire to where they expect hobbits to show up. Frodo uses an alias of Mr. Underhill, smartly taking Gandalf's advice and not using his actual name. They travel through the village, some of which is actually built near a New Zealand military base, and the rest is VFX. And several of the people they walk past are on stilts to give the impression they're far larger than the hobbits. We get a Peter Jackson cameo of him eating a carrot. They head inside the prancing pony, and they meet with Mr. Butterbur. Frodo asks if he's seen Gandalf, only for him to reply that he hasn't seen him in 6 months. Not knowing what to do, they start eating and drinking there, with Pippin going for an entire pint of beer. Sam tells Frodo that he's noticed a figure that's been eyeing them ever since they arrived at the pony. We see that this man is hooded and smoking a pipe, staring at them just like what Sam said.
He's just standing there, menacingly!
Butterbur explains to him that he's a ranger named Strider. Frodo starts playing with the ring, showing that it's further progressing the hold it has on him. But Pippin starts mouthing off while he's drunk that Frodo is his cousin, named Baggins. Frodo makes his way to him to get him to shut up, only to be tripped by one of the patrons. The ring is launched into the air, and when it falls, it slips into Frodo's finger, almost as if it guides itself to it, and it turns him invisible. This is a slight deviation from the book, where Frodo slips it on himself by accident after slipping on a table while singing. Jackson said they did this because they thought it would make Frodo look silly, and it wouldn't help with the dramatic tension that's been set up so far in the film.
The idea of the song, because to have Frodo singing and doing a little dance and then accidentally putting it on made Frodo look kind of silly.
It didn't help the dramatic tension.
And so we really tried to make it not so much Frodo's fault. It's sort of Pippin's fault that the thing begins, and then it's the ring's fault that it goes on his finger. We tried to make it look like it was fate guiding the ring on there, because obviously this concept that the wraiths know where the ring is once you put it on your finger. They can sense it and they can go after you, and we thought, well, the ring is going to want to get on his finger as fast as it possibly can.
The riders are alerted to Frodo slipping on the ring, and they make their way to Bree, showing what would have happened if Frodo had slipped on the ring earlier. We get our first look into the ethereal world, so far we haven't seen the perspective of those who slipped on the ring. And I love how they executed it with the effects and the echoey reverb while inside this world, giving it this outerworldly vibe. Now we see the eye itself. It was set up earlier with the dialogue between the two wizards at Orthanc. The voice from Alan Howard for Sauron is also fantastic.
You cannot hide. I see you.
It's menacing, intimidating, and powerful. Despite that we don't hear Sauron that often, I do love what lines he does have. The eye itself is also interesting. While the Eye of Sauron is mentioned in the books, the idea behind it is that it's more of a metaphor for his seemingly never-ending sight and knowledge. In these movies, however, they take the concept more literally, though I think the idea partially came from the 1980 Breaking Bad's Return of the King movie, where it also has its own version of the Eye of Sauron. So I think it's meant to be a nod to that version of Middle-earth. And I'm glad they did, because the eye is kind of one of the most iconic elements of these movies, and it adds to the threat that Sauron poses, while not being a physical threat himself. After Frodo removes the ring, Strider grabs him, telling Frodo that he's drawn far too much attention to himself, and tracks him to one of the rooms. Strider asks Frodo if he's afraid. Frodo says yes, only for Strider to say he's not nearly frightened enough, telling us just how big of a threat the riders are. The other three barges in on them, with Sam leading the charge, demanding that the ranger unhand Frodo. Strider himself puts it best that Sam has a stout heart, something that will be reinforced as we progress. But the riders are still coming. The gatekeeper heads to open the door, only to be crushed and trampled by the horses. The riders head inside the pony, They move in such a perfect unison and almost hive mind and ghostly manner. With this scene, we get yet another reference to the animated Ralph Bakshi version, where the riders stab the beds, believing that the hobbits are lying on them sleeping, only for it to be just pillows. This isn't a book scene, but I think with the editing, the hobbits seemingly appearing to be waking up before the riders kill them makes for a good fake out. We see that the 5 of them are sleeping in an adjacent building. Frodo asks who they are, prompting Strider to explain that they are the Nazgul, ring race, neither living nor dead. They were the 9 kings of men seen in the prologue. They were offered the rings by Sauron, and blinded by their greed, they took them without question. They are drawn to the ring, and they will never stop hunting them. Now we have the full context of who the Nazgul are, and why they have allegiance to Sauron. The exposition is natural, and the delivery of Viggo Mortensen makes the information that we learn about them even more chilling, especially with the knowledge of the potential fates of those who accept the rings and what they could have been turned into. The following morning, Strider takes them with Bill the pony outside the town and into the woods. Merry rightly questions how they know if Strider really is a friend of Gandalf, but Frodo explains that he believes that a servant of the enemy will appear fairer and feel foul, and that they have no choice but to follow him, telling us that he has more perspective and keen on the outside world than the others. Merry asks where he is taking them, but Strider overhears this despite them whispering, showing that he has very acute senses of hearing. He proclaims that they are heading to Rivendell. Sam is excited by the news since they're going to see the elves in person. Sam in the books is a massive fan of the elves, and while it's not as prevalent here, it's nice to see there is some carryover. And after some more great landscape shots, the hobbits attempt to cook some more food, to the confusion of Strider as they have already had breakfast. He is met with this response from Pippin.
We've had one, yes. What about second breakfast?
Just beautiful. While the memes for this trilogy probably aren't as popular as the Star Wars prequels or even Spider-Man 3, they're pretty high up there in meme culture. Now that I think about it, a lot of movies from the 2000s have a very prevalent meme culture. Just shows how special all movies were back then. Pippin lists all of the 6 square meals that the hobbits have. While it is pretty funny, I think, it's also a bit of world building that Tolkien gave in his work, so incorporating that with some humor is a clever way to accomplish multiple things at once. Strider throws some apples at them, and one hits Pippin in the face. They charge through the swamping terrain, which is actually real, and the actors had to suffer a lot just to accomplish these few seconds of footage. This is honestly way more immersive to me, the terrain being real, as opposed to just learning that it was all green screen, which is why I love highlighting the filmmaking, because it makes me wish there were more movies made like this today. At night, Strider hunts down a deer and brings it there for them to cook. This displays that he is genuinely an ally of theirs, while showing he does care for them beyond just simply being employed to look after them. This is also an actual deer, which Viggo Mortensen suggested, and they shot to see him killing the deer and bringing it. Another thing that Mortensen added to his own touch to is what comes next, with him singing in Elvish. He was taught to sing in the language, but he also added his own touch to it. Frodo picks up what he's been singing, and asks who is she, the woman he sings of. Everyone explains this of Beren and Luthien. The latter gave her immortality being with Beren, a mortal man, and she died. This is the abridged version, of course, for the lore fans, but it serves more purpose than just fan service. Their story foreshadows another one that's very similar in this narrative, and judging from the dialogue, it seems like Strider's in love with the elf woman himself, but considering the remorseful manner in which Morrison delivers his lines, it seems as though he has guilt over that. He's in love, but he doesn't believe it can ever be, informing us that he isn't an arrogant man, but rather humble and caring, telling us much without having to outright say it, a sign of good character writing and subtlety. Cutting back to Isengard, Saruman communicates to Sauron through the Palantir that Isengard is under his command. Sauron orders Saruman to build him an army worth of Mordor. One of the orcs asks him what the Eye commands them.
We have work to do.
The orcs begin to tear down the tree across Isengard, fake tree specifically made just for this scene, and the rain was actually unexpected, but they shot the scene with it raining anyway. Gandalf is held prisoner on top of the tower, witnessing this. He's clearly uncomfortable being exposed to the elements and witnessing what's unfolding around him. Conversely, we the audience are dreading what's to come, considering what we just learned. Despite the film continuously adding more to the narrative, it still manages to be very well structured and paced, not feeling too overwhelming, nor going too fast and rushing what's going on. The hobbits and Strider arrive at Weathertop, a watchtower of Amon Sul from long ago. They make camp there, and Strider provides the hobbits with weapons to defend themselves, signaling that their innocence is soon about to be gone, and they're going to have to take up arms to defend themselves. This is the only real part of the Tom Bombadil chapters that this movie implements, and it works well enough here. I do actually have one criticism of it, but I'm going to save that for a much, and I mean much later scene, where it'll be more relevant. Strider says he's going to have a look around. I've seen people question this move, but considering that he is a ranger, it makes sense that he will want to make sure they can't be tracked by the Nazgul, or potentially anything else that could be a threat to him. So I think that's strategically sound from his perspective, especially since he's provided the hobbits with a means to defend themselves. And to defend themselves, they must do with what comes next. While Frodo is sleeping, the others, being as hungry bastards as we know them to be so far, start to cook some food over a campfire. When Frodo realizes this, he tries to put it out, but it's too late. The Nazgul see it, and with their shrieks, they converge on Weathertop. The hobbits run to the top with no way to escape. 5 of the Nazgul surround them. With both their theme and once again their creepy, hive-mind movement, they manage to make any scene they're in immediately suspenseful and to some, kind of scary. Sam attempts to, once again, being the brave lad that he is, take the charge to fight them head on, but they're overmatched and pushed away by the ringwraiths. Frodo, with no one to fight for him, drops his sword and falls back. I know that many don't like this, since that's not what happens in the book, but to a movie audience, whether from the 2000s or even nowadays, they would find a pretty reasonable reaction, especially for someone who is up against an overwhelming and almost outerworldly threat. Seeing no way out, and with the ring calling to him through its own speech, Frodo slips it back on into the ethereal world, but they're still able to see him. And now the Nazgul have this ghostly appearance that depicts them as an almost zombified form of their former selves shown in the prologue. Their leader attempts to take the ring from Frodo, but he has enough will to pull his hand back, provoking the Nazgul to retaliate by stabbing Frodo with his blade. Before anything else can happen, Strider arrives with a torch and uses it to scare them off, and even burn the Nazgul, ending with his sick toss to one of their faces. One fact about Viggo Mortensen that he initially wasn't even cast in the role, with it instead belonging to Stuart Townsend. But very early on in the shoot, they realized he didn't really fit the role due to being too young, so after looking for other candidates, including Nicolas Cage and Russell Crowe, the latter of which was even offered 10% of the gross pay the movies would have made, Morrison was offered the role and took it up because of his son Henry was a massive fan of the books, and Strider was his favorite character. That must be so cool having a parent who's an actor play your favorite character in the movie adaptation. But anyway, they had to get Morrison to set pretty quickly, and this scene was his very first one that was shot. He only had 2 days worth of sword training when they filmed this. Despite this, it still looks pretty good, to me at least. I'm not an expert swordsman, which is why I don't try to break down these fights down frame by frame, but Bob Anderson, sword trainer for these movies, said that Morrison was the best student he ever had, and he became a master of it by the time that filming ended. That's an amount of dedication and talent that this man has. So you can probably guess at this point that he's the third actor I claim is among the most perfectly cast in these movies, and learning about this stuff has only cemented that in my mind. And this is only the beginning when talking about Viggo in these movies. The hobbits check on Frodo, with Sam being the first one. After the last Nazgul flees, Strider says he's been stabbed with a Morgul blade, and it's beyond his skill to heal, and Frodo needs some elvish medicine. Now while Frodo has definitely been under some stuff, this is the most intense threat yet. And now it starts to turn to morning. We hear that the Nazgul are still out there, especially since there are 4 currently unaccounted for. Sam says there's still 6 days from Rivendell, and Frodo will never make it. While being carried by Strider, Frodo cries out for Gandalf. Back in Isengard, we see the place is being currently industrialized, with all the trees and grass being ripped out and destroyed. A theme that's going to carry over quite well in the second movie. And moth appears to Gandalf, he whispers something to it, and it flies away. This is an actual moth they birthed and used for this scene, and since they only lived for a day, they had to make sure to shoot it before it very quickly died. The orcs are forging swords and armor from the new army. The other ones are digging through what appears to be mud, only for one of them to be attacked and strangled to death. All while Gandalf prevents the others from intervening so he can serve the new creation. We see the newly born orc, Lurtz, the first Uruk-hai. We'll dive into them later, but for now, this is a good way to show the increased strength and ferocity in these new orcs, and this perfectly sets them up as being the new incoming threat. Back to the others, Sam, in a moment to bring comfort to Frodo, points that they are next to the trolls from Bilbo's adventure that he was telling the children earlier. This is a bit fanservice-y, but I can forgive it since it's very quick and not overly distracting and reinforced, as opposed to some other movies. And Sam does have a pretty good reason to point this out, showing his overt care towards Frodo, so I'm cool with it. Sam and Strider look for some Kingsfoil herbs to attempt to heal Frodo the best they can for the time being, for if they don't do something soon, Frodo will turn to a wraith himself. While Strider is looking, there's a sword pointing towards his throat, with a woman's voice wondering why Rangers call off guard. There's this aura of light, and we see this beautiful elven woman approach Frodo. This is Arwen, played by Liv Tyler, and Strider's love as foreshadowed earlier. Both the lighting and Liv Tyler's voice give this ethereal quality to Arwen, similar to the other elves I've talked about. Tyler doesn't have a deep voice, especially when you listen to her in the behind-the-scenes interviews.
When my dad saw the movie for the first time, he's like, whose voice was that? I was like, Dad, you jerk. It's mine, I'm an actress.
But her voice work is so good, it's kind of hard to imagine this not being her real voice. They quarrel for a bit over who's taking Frodo, but Arwen claims it should be her since she is the fastest rider and the power of her people to protect Frodo, showing her bravery. This manages to make Strider concede and she rides off. Originally, this was Glorfindale's role in the book, but considering that Arwen's going to be a more prominent character in the films than in the novels, I think it makes sense to set her up now, and Glorfindale only shows up for this one scene, so this is a good change. We get this intense horse chase scene with some close calls, such as Arwen being scratched by a tree and Frodo almost getting grabbed by one of the Nazgul, making for some nail-biting moments. That, coupled with the music and the overhead shots, makes for a solid action sequence. They reach the fort of Rivendell, where this standoff ensues. Yet another change in the scene is the role that Frodo plays. In the book, he wasn't this ill that he couldn't ride the horse to the fort himself. He has a pretty cool exchange with the Nazgul where he shows his bravery standing up to them. I'm of two minds about this. While I do quite like the book version of the scene, I think the way the movie does it makes sense. It makes the wound from the Morgul blade more of a threat, and it gives us a cool exchange with Arwen instead, where she stands up to the Nazgul.
If you want him, come and claim him.
The Nazgul close in when Arwen whispers in Elvish, causing the waters of the fort to move more rapidly, causing this tidal wave in the form of horses to sweep the Nazgul and their horses away. Frodo collapses, and despite having just met him, Arwen has such compassion and love for him, she encourages Frodo not to give in to it, and she prays to our presumably the gods of Middle-earth, the Valar for the Tolkien fans, that the grace has been given to her to pass on to Frodo instead, and to spare him. We get these phase transitions, where Elrond from the prologue whispers in his own elven language to heal Frodo, and Frodo asks where he's at, and he's informed by a familiar voice that it's October 24th at 10 o'clock in the morning. It is Gandalf. Frodo's glad to see him, but is curious as to why he didn't meet with them at Bree. Gandalf says he was delayed, cutting back to Isengard sometime in the past. Saruman is torturing Gandalf, demanding once again that he join him. He still has some respect for Gandalf from their past friendship. Gandalf tells Saruman there is only one Lord of the Ring, and he does not share power, meaning that the alliance between Saruman and Sauron is doomed to fail, with Sauron likely using Saruman as a means to an end, being the ultimate manipulator that he is. The moth is flying while this takes place, and a giant eagle swoops in as Gandalf falls.
So you have chosen death.
I just love Christopher Lee so much, man. Sam rushes in, and we're told by Gandalf that Sam has already left Frodo's side, so basically Sam is just being Sam at this point. I like the detail of Sam holding Frodo's hand, that being a detail in the book that's just solely in the scene without any explicit mention. If this was handled by less competent writers, especially nowadays, that will definitely be called out in the film, but thankfully this movie has enough restraint to not do that. The scene caps off with a proper look at Elrond, portrayed by Hugo Weaving, welcoming Frodo to Rivendell. We're provided with an overhead shot of the place, and it looks amazing. They brought in two artists, John Howe and Alan Lee, who are well known for their art depicting Tolkien's work, to provide their art direction to the movies. And their work is the reason why this movie's imagery is so iconic and memorable, while not straying from what Tolkien envisioned. Frodo reunites with the other hobbits, including Bilbo, who moved here after leaving the Shire at the beginning. He shows Frodo his completed book. Frodo said he always thought himself as partaking in Bilbo's adventures, only for this to be quite different, claiming that he isn't like Bilbo. He now realizes that the world is a very dangerous place, and is not as glamorous as he thought. His experiences have gained him knowledge and experience of the world. He's now humbled by his near-death experience. He and Sam share a scene, with Sam already packing to go home now that their quest is over, or at least as far as they know, and Frodo announces his wish to go back home. It's ironic now that Frodo, who had been the most adventurous hobbit up to this point, has changed his perspective and wishes to stay home like all the others. But unfortunately, that's not where the story is headed. Gandalf says that Frodo will carry his wound to the end of his days, further setting up the ending. Elrond notes his resilience against the ring, but Gandalf doesn't want to ask any more from Frodo, since it's a burden he never should have had to bear in the first place. But Elrond goes on to tell that the eye is fixed on Rivendell. Now that Saruman has betrayed them, their list of allies grows thin. Gandalf, having seen what Saruman has been doing while he was in prison at Isengard, informed Elrond that Saruman's breeding an army of orcs and goblin men through foulcraft, explaining why Lurtz is noticeably different from the other orcs that we've seen up to this point. Adding on to this, the new orcs can move in sunlight, a weakness that the regular orcs tend to have that is carried over from the books, since they don't have a fondness for the sunlight and prefer to travel in darkness. Elrond knows they can't fight both the forces of Mordor and Isengard at the same time, thus the ring can't stay in Rivendell. setting up the real journey that's soon to commence. Elrond summons leaders and representatives from different races to decide on the fate of the world and the ring. More on these guys later. Elrond reinforces what we've seen previously, that the elves are leaving Middle-earth and poses a question on who's going to lead after they're gone. The dwarves hide in their mountains digging for treasure, for they care nothing for the troubles of others, demonstrating the contempt the elves and dwarves have for each other, which is a large point made throughout the rest of this movie. Gandalf says they must trust men, only for Elrond to claim that men are weak. The blood of Numenor is spent, and it's because of men that the ring survives. As we saw, he was there 3,000 years ago at the Battle of Mordor during the Last Alliance. He took Isildur to the mountain to destroy the ring, only for Isildur, who is dubbed by Hugo Weaving the scene, to say no and leave the ring. I've seen the criticism that Elrond should have tried to stop Isildur, whether by killing him or having guards at the entrance to prevent him from leaving, but I have some counters for this. For one, he likely had no idea back then what the ring was truly capable of and how powerful its corruption is, so he simply entrusted Isildur to carry out the task. 2. Even if let's say he did kill Isildur and attempt to destroy the ring himself, he probably wouldn't succeed. The ring would be working on overdrive to prevent itself from being destroyed, so even though Elrond would be more resilient to its corruption, he would still fall himself. It's just that powerful. That would easily spark a war between the men and elves. I know that some would argue that would be the lesser of two evils compared to allowing Sauron to live on, but that doesn't hold up well if you think about it. A war between the men and elves, especially at this point where they're at the height of their power, would be incredibly destructive, potentially even more so than the war with Sauron. In the best case scenario for the elves, they would win but at tremendous costs, or they lose and are either exterminated or exiled from Middle-earth, something that Elrond would not risk. It would take millennia for Sauron to regather his strength and rebuild his forces, which is what actually happens since these movies are even happening in the first place, thus, I don't see the issue. Elrond claims that since the line of kings is broken, they are leaderless. Gandalf claims there is one who can unite them, but Elrond says he chose the path of exile long ago. The next scene is one of my favorites in this movie. Cutting to Strider, we're introduced to Boromir by Sean Bean from Gondor. He's surprised to see that Strider is another man like him instead of an elf. Strider says that the men of the South are welcome there, but he doesn't say it in an enthusiastic or greeting manner, implying some level of indifference or even contempt, compounded by the next part, where Boromir asks who Strider is, and instead of giving his name, he just claims to be a friend of Gandalf. Boromir says that means they're on common purpose, and refers to him as a friend, only for Strider to not reciprocate the same sentiment. After an awkward pause, Boromir notices the shards of Narsil, the blade that defeated Sauron. He picks up the hilt and examines it, only to cut his finger with it. Even after all his time, it's still as sharp as ever. See what I mean when I say this is no ordinary sword? Strider gazes at him in a disapproving stare. Boromir attempts to place it back, only to drop it, but walks out in shame for desecrating such a significant piece of history. Strider places it back on its resting place. Arwen walks in and questions why he fears to pass. He is only Isildur's heir, not Isildur himself. He is not bounded by his fate. Strider claims that the same blood runs in his veins, the same weakness, revealing that he is the one whom Gandalf and Elrond were referring to earlier, if the cut to his face after that conversation didn't already make that apparent. Also setting up a major character arc that will be pertinent to Strider's character going forward. He's afraid of making the same mistake as his ancestors did, and he overall views the race of men to be weak, much like Elrond. Arlen caps off this scene by referring to Strider that he will confront the evil and defeat it, also saying in Elvish that the shadow will not sway either of them. This scene so far is my favorite. It reveals and says that much about the characters involved, whether subtly or even clearly, without being blunt, has great dialogue and acting, topped with solid cinematography. Alone together, Strider and Arwen recount the time they first met. Strider said to him he thought he was gazing into a dream. Arwen exclaims that she would rather spend one lifetime with him than face all the ages of the world alone. She places her necklace, the Even Star, in his hand. Strider claims that she cannot give it, only for her to retort that it's her right to give, like her heart, and they share their first kiss we see in these films. I don't quite like it as much as the previous scene, but I still like it. It's romantic without being too try-hard or forced, the music is stellar, and adds another element to Strider's arc for his trilogy. As mentioned earlier, Strider feels guilty for his love for Arwen because he believes himself to be bringing her to her doom, but she doesn't view it that way. This causes some tension between them, even if they still ultimately share their love. But up next is not only one of the most pivotal scenes in this movie, but the trilogy as a whole. So let's get straight into it. The next day, the Council of Elrond congregates to discuss the ring and the impending doom that it will bring. The members consist of representatives of men, elves, and dwarves. We see Boromir representing Gondor, Legolas, portrayed by Orlando Bloom, whose first role was this movie, and was cast only 2 days before he graduated from his acting class, and Gimli, portrayed by John Rhys Davies, who you might recall as Salah from the Indiana Jones movies. Elrond asks Frodo to bring the ring to the pedestal, and the entire council mutters in shock and awe at the sight of the ring. Boromir is mesmerized by the ring, recounting a dream he had of a voice crying that doom is near at hand, for Isildur's bane is found. And as he's saying this, he steps toward the ring, attempting to reach it, only for Gandalf to retaliate by uttering the black speech of Mordor, the same speech he told Frodo back in the Shire that he would not utter here, and now we know why. The area turns black and gray with a thunderous, almost earthquake-like effect happening. He says that he does not ask for Elrond's pardon, for the language will be heard by every tongue in the West if Sauron isn't stopped, for the ring is altogether evil. This is quite telling of Gandalf's character that he's now willing to compromise his previous principles of uttering the speech when he deems it to be necessary to prove a point. Boromir interjects that his father, the steward of Gondor, has only kept the forces of Mordor at bay while the rest of the lands are kept safe. He demands that Gondor be given the ring to be used against the enemy. From this scene and several preceding ones, we learn that this is his primary purpose for attending this meeting. He is here so he can obtain the ring, believing it's the only chance they have to stop Sauron. He has the interests of his people at heart, informing his actions and his character. Strider correctly points out that they can't wield the ring. None of them can. The ring only answers to Sauron alone, exactly what Gandalf said to Frodo before departing from him. Boromir dismisses his counsel, claiming that he's just a mere ranger, carrying over their dynamic established in their first scene together, that neither of them thinks that highly of each other. Legolas proclaims that he is no mere ranger. He is Aragorn, son of Arathorn, the heir of Gondor. So now we have the final piece of the puzzle. Strider is simply an alias used by Aragorn this entire time. The mystery has been answered. This answers why Aragorn acted so cold towards Boromir in the last scene, because he knows he wouldn't take a liking to the man who is destined to replace his father as the main ruler of Gondor. And we also know that Aragorn doesn't view the race of men very fondly despite being one himself. It's reasonable that he will know Boromir is from Gondor, essentially the heir to the throne of Stewart as well, so all the pieces fall into place, giving us a full picture of Aragorn's character. He's a man who's unsure of himself and his kind, and simply wants to be viewed as a ranger and nothing more. He also has guilt over his relationship with Arwen. So far, there's a lot to be done with this setup, and it's going to be intriguing to see how it's developed from here. Aragorn asks Legolas to sit down, with Boromir following that Gondor has no king, and Gondor needs no king. Right now, I find that Aragorn and Boromir have the most fertile ground for character work between each other and themselves, which is impressive considering they've only been recently, especially in Boromir's case, been introduced in the movie. I think that's a sign of good writing they have this much going on for them despite not being the main characters. Gandalf agrees with Aragorn that the ring can't be used, and Elrond announces that it must be destroyed. Gimli, showing what kind of character he is right off the bat, impulsively says, "What are we waiting for?" and then attempts to smash it with his axe, only to be blown back on his ass with the ring perfectly intact. Elrond claims that the ring can't be destroyed by any craft that they possess, answering why they haven't done that before or why they can't now. Remember when films used to do that? When Gimli smashed his axe, Frodo felt another flash of the Eye of Sauron, and can still hear the ring muttering in black speech, implying that he's forming this psychic connection to it. Elrond claims that one of them must take it to Mount Doom to destroy it. Boromir interjects that one can't just simply walk into Mordor. There are other things there than just orcs. There is evil that does not sleep, and the Great Eye is ever watchful. It is a land made of fire, ash, and dust. The air you breathe is a poisonous fume. Not even with 10,000 men could you do this, imparting to us just how treacherous and nearly impossible the challenge is, as well as how pessimistic that Boromir is about the situation. Legolas argues that the ring must be destroyed, but Gimli fights back, claiming that Legolas thinks he's the one to do it, and that he would rather be dead before seeing the hands of an elf, highlighting the racial tensions between the elves and dwarves alluded to recently. Everyone there begins shouting and arguing. For this very clever bit of cinematography, we see Frodo witnessing the ring tear and divide everyone apart with a flood of fire cast over them, symbolizing the nature of the ring and its ability to divide the people of Middle-earth and destroy them. Realizing this, Frodo makes the single bravest choice in this entire trilogy.
I will take it! I will take it! I will take the ring to Mordor. I do not know the way.
Despite being a small hobbit whose main desire has just been to go home, he decides to take the most daring and dangerous journey one can embark on. Halfway through the movie, he's grown to be a courageous being who's willing to risk his life despite having been through so much already to save the world. It makes sense for him to change because he's already become familiar with the ring, and just as mentioned, he knows what the ring is doing and believes only he has what it takes to carry it to prevent anyone else from having to carry the same burden or to be destroyed by it. Gandalf volunteers to go with Frodo to help him with this burden. Aragorn also joins. Whether by life or by death, if he can protect Frodo, he will. This is what they said when they first met in Bree in the novel, but I love this incorporation here because it still fits into the scene and it carries a lot of weight due to their time together. But the greatness doesn't end here when it's followed by this iconic moment.
You have my sword. And you have my bow. And my axe.
We see that Legolas is uncomfortable with Gimli coming aboard, even though they're united to see this quest through. They're still not friends. Another character journey that might be explored. Boromir tells Frodo that he carries the fate of them all, and Gondor will see it through. It's interesting to me that he says Gondor instead of I will see it through, hinting that he's doing it more from Gondor rather than it being his own choice. Sam also comes out of hiding to join them, followed by Merry and Pippin. Even though it is a secret meeting, they still stood by to help their friend in time of need, and that's what they're going to do. Some say it's questionable that Elrond allows them to go since they're just small hobbits who have no experience in the world or with combat, but there are reasonable assumptions to be made here. First, hobbits, as established, tend to have a much higher resistance to the ring than other races do. In the case that Frodo dies, someone else will have to be the bearer, and having it be one of the hobbits makes sense to have a backup, as callous as that may be. Though from what we learned in the next movie, that's pretty in character for Elrond, and that's getting ahead of ourselves. Plus, they volunteer to join, and they make it clear they're not going to take no for an answer, and they're going to need all help they can get, and they've already helped Frodo so far, so why not allow them when they've already pitched him before? This scene crescendos with Elrond telling them as the Fellowship of the Ring.
Where are we going?
So far, I think this stretch of the movie has been my favorite. For the back-to-back great scenes with all world building, character moments, and introductions, it's still moving the plot along despite being one of the slower parts of the movie. And we're officially at the halfway point of the movie. This is disc 1 of the extended edition, so now on to disc 2. Beginning with the second half, we cut to an extended edition scene of Aragorn at the grave of his mother, Gilraen. Elrond recounts that she knew that Aragorn would be hunted all of his life, so she sent Aragorn there when he was only a child to be raised by elves. The elves have the crafting ability to reforge the sword of Elendil to its former glory, but only Aragorn has the power to wield it. This marks another massive deviation from the books. In those, Aragorn was far more sure of himself, and from the start, he sought to gain his heritage as king. Here though, he's far more unsure of himself, having a more reluctant heir type of art. So, what do I think of this? Well, for now, I'm not going to make any definitive statements, for I believe the best way to answer that question is to simply further progress into the story to see how well it's executed and managed. But I do like this setup so far, and from this information we just obtained, I think it contextualizes why Aragorn's reluctant to take the role. Since he's been raised by elves in Rivendell, where Elrond would surely be a key figure in his life, he would have influenced Aragorn with his recounting of the story of Isildur taking the ring for himself. We've witnessed Elrond's distrust of man, and he said himself that he believes that they are weak. So that mindset would have been passed down to Aragorn, not to pursue his destiny, in fear of making the same mistake as his ancestors. As I said, I think this is a very strong foundation for a compelling journey. We just need to see what this has in store for us. Before embarking on this quest, Bilbo provides Frodo with gear from his past, his sword Sting, which glows blue when orcs are nearby, and a chainmail vest made of mithril, light as a feather and as strong as a dragon's scale. As Frodo's unbuttoning his shirt to put the vest on, Bilbo notices the ring on a chain necklace. He asks Frodo to hold it for one last time, only for Frodo to reject the offer by buttoning his shirt back up. Only for this to happen. This moment seems to have one of two reactions. Either you are jump scared by it, as clearly as intention, or you found it hysterical and it made you laugh. And yes, I've seen people claim they laughed watching it. While I can't speak for everyone, I would say I kind of found it terrifying witnessing it as a kid, but your mileage may vary. But the important fact that matters is that Bilbo is suffering withdrawals from being away from the ring for so long, and it communicates how addictive and influential it is. And I do love his reaction afterwards, where he begins crying for placing Frodo to have to bear this burden on a journey where he could very well die. But Frodo doesn't care, and he comforts him. He doesn't blame him because it's not his fault, for he had no idea about the true nature of the ring, showing Frodo's near unending kindness, and this interaction is not only important just for the plot, but also for the characters involved, because this is the last time they're going to be with each other for a very long time. A very, very long time. And this movie makes it count. Before they depart, Elrond sees them off, saying they have no bond or oath to go further than they wish, giving them the blessings of all the men, elves, and free folk of Middle-earth. I like the last part where he says free folk instead of dwarves, displaying that he's still prejudiced against dwarves and doesn't consider them highly enough to even mention them by the name of their race. And Gimli's reaction is one of disappointment naturally. See guys, this is how you show someone is racist in a manner that is subtle, not heavy-handed like that of a freight train. Aragorn shares his last look at Arwen, and the Fellowship begin their journey with Frodo leading the way. In another good character moment, he asks Gandalf which way between the two directions. Frodo isn't experienced with the world, and the scene reminds us of that, while also showing that Gandalf is there for him when he needs it. They begin marching onward, and they pass through the ruins of Eregion, where the other Rings of Power were forged. I sure hope to make a show about that someday. That could be awesome. Somehow, Howard Shore is probably the only composer who can make a group of guys in a pony climb through small hill and rocks be the most epic thing ever. Gandalf says they must hold the course west of the Misty Mountains for 40 days, and hopefully the Gap of Rohan will still be open to them. They make camp, Sam is cooking some meat, and Merry and Pippin are training with Boromir in sword fighting. This is what we call character bonding, folks. For some reason, movies like to forget to do that sometimes, but even giving us interactions like this goes a long way to making the team feel like they're friends. Gimli suggested Gandalf they make their way through the mines of Moria, only for Gandalf to shut him down, saying that he will not go through the mountains unless he has no other choice. Pippin gets cut by Boromir by accident, with both he and Merry taking him down. Considering that a pivotal payoff is going to take place, this is a good way to develop their friendship with him. Aragorn attempts to break them up, only for the two of them to grab his legs and slam him down. Legolas witnesses something unusual in the sky. At first, Gimli believes it's just a cloud, but it's moving way too fast for it just to be a mere cloud. Legolas determines it to be Creebine from Dunland, spies of Saruman. There is a brief suspenseful scene of the gang hiding their things and taking cover under rocks and shrubbery. The crows pass, and Gandalf determines they must take the pass to Caladros. Next is another particularly favorite moment of mine. During the hike on top of the mountains, Frodo tumbles backwards. After he's caught by Aragorn, he notices that the ring is missing. It's on the mountains, only for it to be picked up by Boromir. And the prop for the ring is actually pretty big, but they use forced perspective to make it appear small. Boromir laments at how they suffer through so much fear and doubt over such a small thing, and notice the music in this scene.
It is a strange fate that we should suffer so much fear and doubt over so small a thing.
This musical piece is going to be reoccurring going forward, which is why I'm highlighting it now. We're witnessing Boromir's descent in real time. We saw this begin at the Council of Elrond scene, but it's further progressing to something worse. It's snaring Boromir for its power and influence. Aragorn demands that Boromir returns it to Frodo, and after a second, he does, and he tries to play it off as a joke, but it's clear that Aragorn is not buying it. He had his hand on his sword the whole time. He was prepared to kill Boromir if that's what it took, signifying the king's discontent with Boromir and the rivalry that they've had with each other since they first met. We cut to Isengard for the first time in a bit now. The crows fly into the caverns below, a combination of both VFX and natural practical models that blend perfectly. Now knowing what they're doing, Saruman asks Gandalf if he can't lead them through Caladros, we risk a more dangerous road. The Fellowship makes its way through the mountainside, where the snow is pouring down on them, and Legolas can walk through it with no issue, not even making a footprint. From what I've gathered from an article online, he must weigh only about 7.5 pounds to be able to walk through this. While obviously he weighs more than that, it demonstrates how light-footed elves are, yet another way they're more powerful than the common man. The snow they made for this set isn't actually snow, but it's rice flakes and polystyrene, which made the set hellish for how hot it was. Yeah, it wasn't cold, it was the complete opposite. It's a large model they made where one side was created so Orlando Bloom could walk through it to the illusion that he's light-footed. Legolas notices a voice coming from the storm, and Gandalf determines that it's Saruman. He's attempting to use his magic to make the storm worse to bring down the mountain on top of them. Gandalf tries to counter it with his own magic, only to be overpowered by Saruman when he uses lightning from the storm to strike the mountain, leading to the Fellowship being buried in snow. It was made pretty clear already that Saruman is more powerful than Gandalf in their fight, but this only reaffirms it. They dig themselves out and they debate where to go. Boromir wants to go for the Gap of Rohan to make their way to his city. He still wants to go to Minas Tirith to get the ring to his people, but Aragorn counters that the Gap of Rohan would bring them too close to Isengard. Gimli once again suggests they travel through Moria. Saruman communicates to Gandalf that he fears going into the mines because of what the dwarves woke in Khazad-dûm due to mining too greedily and too deep. Shadow and flame. Explain why Gandalf was hesitant to go into Moria earlier. fearing the great evil that lies within, building up to something truly terrible. Gandalf asks Frodo what he wants to do. People have cited this as a strange move on Gandalf's part to trust someone who doesn't even know which way Mordor was to decide this. But Frodo is the ring bearer, the most important person on the Fellowship, so Gandalf is simply seeking him to be most comfortable as he can be under these circumstances, because they have to pick something, and no matter what they choose, there's going to be some risk involved. Boromir cries out that they can't stay there, it'll be the death of the hobbits. He's grown to care about them in his time with them, and as mentioned, this moment is crucial to one of the most crucial scenes in the film, so every second counts. Frodo says they'll go through the mines, prompting what Boromir just said, not wanting his closest friends to die, so that's the choice he makes. And Gandalf respects that decision, even though it's the one he's the least secure about. But since he respects Frodo and cares about his comfort above his own, he carries on Frodo's wish. They arrive outside Moria at the Misty Mountains. Gandalf asks Frodo about his shoulder, referring to his Morgul wound, as a reminder that it isn't any normal wound and that's going to carry over later. He also asks about the ring, and goes on to explain that there'll be evil drawn to the ring inside and out of the Fellowship. Frodo can only trust himself and his strength, the start of the other side of his arc that the second half of this film is going to challenge him with. Gandalf elaborates that there are some powers greater than him, or that he's simply not been tested yet. He is still scared of the shadow and flame that lurks in Moria, so the audience is also fearing the increasingly impending reality that Gandalf is going to have to face it, and he may not win. An excellent way to raise the stakes and tension of the story in a way that we haven't seen up to this point. They reach this secret entrance at night, with the moonlight revealing the moon runes that encompasses the door. Gandalf says the runes say, "Speak, friend, and enter," believing that to pass as a friend, you need to speak the password and the doors will open. He attempts to speak the word, but continuously fails, forcing the Fellowship to wait till he guesses. I like that this shows a degree of fallibility in Gandalf, and while he is old and wise, as he says himself, he used to know all the spells in the tongues of man, elf, and even orc, but even he doesn't know everything or is always right. Making him more than just his standard wise wizard character we tend to know from fantasy stories.
There was a lot of concern about whether Gandalf should appear too much of a failure here, and I guess the slightly longer cut shows more of his frustration. But I actually always loved it. I thought that to make Gandalf fallible, to show that even though he's this spirit, he is inhabited in the body of an old man, he does forget things, he's not always perfect. I think it was really nice for his character. It's anti-wizard in a funny kind of way.
With Gandalf continuously attempting to open the door, Sam and Aragorn release Bill since he has no use to them in the mines, with Sam being somewhat disappointed to let him go. The other hobbits are throwing stones into the river, only for Aragorn to warn them not to disturb the water. Gandalf gets frustrated not being able to open the door, but Frodo asks what the Elvish word for friend is, and Gandalf says,
Bella.
Upon uttering the word, the door opens. I know that some criticize Frodo for not having his heroic moments from earlier in the movie, but I think including this is a nice trade-off, showing his intelligence and contribution to the team by being more than just a ring bearer. But simultaneously, as this is going on, there are these ripples in the water that suspensefully make their way closer to the shore where the Fellowship is. They make their way inside, Gandalf uses his staff to light their path, only to see the skeletal remains of the dwarves, having been pierced by goblin arrows. Boromir decides to make for the gap of Rohan, only for Frodo to be grabbed by tentacles. The hobbits cry out to Aragorn, referring to him as Strider. Seemingly, they still haven't gotten used to referring to him by his actual name, a nice little detail. The tentacle monsters notice the Watcher in the water, and it looks great. In the book, we don't really know what it looks like, outside of having 21 tentacles. They have to scale them back down to a dozen in the film, since that was too difficult to animate. But regardless, I love the design, and seeing the actual creature itself is a treat. A quick little action scene follows with the Fellowship cutting the tentacles to save Frodo, and have to retreat inside the caves with the monster pulling the entrance down, keeping them inside. Done with practical explosions, by the way. I've seen the argument that it's convenient that the monster just happens to show up now to block them inside. Maybe they could have thrown in the explanation that it's there because of the dam the goblins built to use it to prevent intruders or anyone from escaping. But I don't see it being that detrimental here, since having a water creature showing up a large body of water that the film is building up to earlier with the stone throwing isn't egregious, I think. Regardless, the game realizes they have no options but to navigate through the mines, requiring a 4-day journey. While walking through the mines, Gandalf explains to the others that the wealth of Moria was founded by Mithril, and the shirt that Bilbo was given by Thorin was worth more than the entirety of the Shire. The camera focuses on Frodo, and an expression of surprise on his face upon hearing this, and from the dialogue from the others, they don't seem to be aware yet that Frodo has a shirt now, building up to a surprise later on. And the dialogue adds some world building to the dwarves and Moria, since up to this point, we didn't really know what they mined there. The Fellowship continues climbing, only being met with a three-way path, and Gandalf has no memory of the place, forcing him to stop and camp while Gandalf determines the way. Another example of Gandalf's fallibility. What follows is one of my favorite scenes in this movie. Frodo notices this creature climbing close by, and Gandalf says it's Gollum, following them for 3 days. Frodo says that Gollum must escape the dungeons of Barad-dûr, only for Gandalf to correct him, claiming that he was set loose, implying that it's nearly impossible to escape from Barad-dûr, adding to the impending dread for when they have to cross Mordor. Gollum is drawn by the ring. He loves it and hates it, much like how he loves and hates himself. He was once called Smeagol for finding the ring, for it turned into the creature that he is today. Another important element that's going to be prevalent in the accompanying installments. Frodo believes it's a pity that Bilbo didn't kill Gollum when he had the chance, but Gandalf challenges him on this, claiming that it was pity that prevented Bilbo from killing him, many that lived to serve death, and many that died to serve life, asking Frodo if he can give it to them. He shouldn't be too eager to deal out death and judgment. Not even the very wise can see all ends. His heart believes that Gollum has some part to play, for good or ill, and the pity of Bilbo will rule the fate of many. Frodo exclaims his wish that the ring had never come to him, or that any of this had happened. What follows is one of the most potent piece of wisdom in these movies.
You all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us.
This scene is lifted from one of the earlier chapters in the book that takes place in the Shire, but the writers of this movie managed to make it fit so beautifully in this scene. Gandalf's dialogue could honestly be considered the main thesis of Lord of the Rings, or at least to me, since one of the best things about art is what you take away from it. You can watch this movie and have a completely different takeaway from what it's trying to say. I do believe that this part is one of the best in terms of exploring the themes of this trilogy. Even in the times we live in, no matter how terrible or bleak may seem, it's ultimately up to us to decide what we make of it. Even if we currently do live in rough times, we can still do something great with them. Tolkien fought World War I and wrote the books while World War II raged on, arguably during the darkest time of the previous century. But despite that, he wrote one of the most epic and best pieces of literature of all time, which has changed the lives of many to this very day. And Frodo is responsible for saving the world since it's on the knife's edge. He can be so much more than the little hobbit the world thinks of him as. Gandalf explains that Bilbo was meant to find the ring, and Frodo was meant to have it. That is an encouraging thought. Both from the music and the acting elevate this scene to such heights, I can't think how this scene could be any better. And considering this is the last scene these two have for a very, very long time, they spent it very well. Gandalf now knows the way to the smell not being as foul down there, and whenever in doubt, follow your nose. The group finds themselves in the dwarven city of Darrodelf, and Sam couldn't have put it any better, with it being an eye-opener. But unfortunately, the good for them ends here. Gimli notices a room and runs into it, and turns out to be the tomb of Balin, Lord of Moria. So any hope that he still might have been alive is now gone. You have to feel pretty bad for Gimli as he mourns for his cousin, and John Rhys-Davies sells the grief pretty well. It honestly hits much harder after watching the Hobbit movies, since Balin's a pretty good character in those films. The color grading done in post-production also gives the vibe of being a desolate and dead place. I haven't really brought up the color grading until now, but it's really good in all these films. Gandalf picks up a book from the skeletal corpse of Ori, chronicling their attempts to reclaim Moria, only to be overrun by the goblins there with no way to get out. Pippin touches an arrow leading to the head of a skeleton to drop into the well with a series of loud clacking noises. The film has a series of cuts throughout Moria, showcasing how loud it was with a series of screams. Frodo unsheathes his sword with it now glowing blue. Boromir heads to the door only to be almost skewered by a couple of arrows.
They have a cave troll.
I swear, the dialogue is so iconic. They barricade the doors, with Gimli proudly boasting there is still one dwarf that still draws breath. The goblins are breaking through their weapons, with Aragorn and Legolas sniping them with their arrows, as the scene builds tension very well. They break in and the action starts. I'm not going to try a frame-by-frame breakdown of the action as I said before, but there are things worth highlighting. To start is the music, or rather, the lack of it. To my knowledge, unless there are any in the sequels that I'm forgetting, this is the only fight scene without music for a large duration of it. Not only does it provide this scene with its own flavor, it also gives it a raw and I'll argue more personal feeling to the fight. The Fellowship is fighting for their lives with a desperate attempt to survive, and I feel that more by solely focusing on them and not the music. I also love the designs for the Moria orcs or goblins here too. They gave them this cockroach insectoid aesthetic to them, giving them some of their own identity compared to the ones we've seen so far. The cave troll comes barging in like the Kool-Aid Man, and much like everything else, the VFX have aged pretty well for the most part. I love the dumb yet menacing look that it has. We see that it's being bound by these chains around its neck, with a couple of goblins forcing it to move and fight, giving us a little bit of sympathy for it, and it kind of makes me feel bad that we have to see it be put down. It tries to stop on Sam, but Aragorn and Boromir pull the change to stop it, and despite not being a creature they can obviously see while filming, they use these tennis ball-like objects to give the actors something to look at, and it is convincing that they're in the same place interacting with it. Boromir gets thrown into the wall, and while he's recovering, a golem tries to kill him, only for Aragorn to throw a sword at it. This is so far the first positive interaction between Aragorn and Boromir, despite not trusting each other, to the point that Aragorn was about to kill him earlier. He still values him enough as an acquaintance to save his life. They even have a nod of acknowledgement before they continue to fight, showing a start of some trust between the two. The troll attempts to use the chain as a weapon, it wraps around a pillar, and Legolas attempts to shoot it in the head, only for the arrow to bounce off and the chain breaks. Sam starts using his frying pan against the goblins, adding a bit of light comedy without outright intruding on the seriousness of the situation. A much better attempt than most of the Hobbit movies at adding humor during action. The troll targets Frodo, and despite help from Aragorn with a massive spear, he gets knocked out, leaving Frodo cornered. And then... the two other hobbits jump on and start stabbing the troll, and the rest of the Fellowship gangbang the troll until it dies. With all their combatants dead, they tend to Frodo only to see that he's still alive. They're surprised by this, only for Frodo to reveal his mithril shirt, which is very pretty. While I don't envy the guys who had to make it because they spent years putting together millions of rings to make their chainmail armor for all these movies, to the point they lost their prints on some of their fingers. The least glamorous job when making these movies, and they still put their all into it. To address another criticism that I've seen, people have said that Frodo should still be dead from the stab despite having a mithril vest due to the pressure from the cave troll. But I have a couple of counters to that. For one, I would argue that's an appeal to reality. It's pretty well established that the mithril is beyond any normal armor, as Bilbo said in Rivendell, so I can believe that this fantasy armor is capable of surviving this. Plus, if you look at the spear, you can see it has multiple tips at the end, but only a single blunt end struck Frodo, so he's not even being hit with the full strength and force of the troll and the spear, so I think this is an invalid criticism. More golems are making their way to the tomb, with Gandalf taking the lead to retreat to the bridge of Khazad-dûm, only for the Fellowship to be surrounded by goblins. There's a bit of a goof with Frodo's sword not glowing, but that's likely due to budget constraints. A roar is heard among the fiery glow, causing all the goblins to retreat. Boromir asks what this new devilry is. Gandalf explains it as a Balrog of Morgoth, a demon from the ancient world. This is what he was afraid of the whole time, and with it scaring off all the goblins when they had the Fellowship dead to rights, you know it's not something to be taken lightly. They run away, with Boromir almost falling to the pits below. Gandalf appears to be weary, ordering Aragorn to lead them on. They find themselves in trouble as some of the stairs have a gap between them. Legolas leads on, with Gandalf following afterwards, looking back to see if the Balrog has caught up with them. Goblins fire arrows at them, only being met with arrows from Legolas. Aragorn tosses Sam and is about to do the same to Gimli, only for the prideful dwarf to refuse. He attempts to jump himself, only to almost slip backwards, only being saved by Legolas grabbing his beard. Another funny bit that doesn't take away from the action at hand. This leaves only Aragorn and Frodo, but more of the stairs start to give away. To make matters worse, a falling rock breaks the stairs behind them, causing their part to lean away. The contentious part is to see what happens next. Aragorn and Frodo lean the stairs forward, which allows them to make it to safety. I've seen people say this is impossible. I've tried to look up whether or not it is, and the results were inconclusive for what I can make. Granted, I couldn't find anything official, only seeing people's opinions on Reddit, so I'm not taking anything they have to say seriously. I'm not a physicist, but from what I can tell, I do think it is possible since the stairs seem stable enough to allow them to do this, but if you can make a compelling argument, I will concede. But so far, I don't think this is too much of an issue. Though granted, this is still far more believable than the physics of some other movies and shows that are part of this franchise, so it has that going for it at least. Anyway, the Fellowship triumphantly makes its way down the stairs, and Gandalf orders them to the bridge, but it catches up to them. My lord, this thing looks so good. And the world is captured by pushing a cinder block, believe it or not. The group passes the bridge with Gandalf as the last one behind. Realizing it needs to be stopped here and now, or otherwise he'll catch up to them, Gandalf is forced to confront his fears and make his stand now. Leading to the most iconic and heroic moments in cinema, ripped straight from the pages of the text. Gandalf announces himself as the servant of the secret fire. The Balrog creates his fire sword, but Gandalf shields himself from it. The Balrog creates a whip, leading to this all-glorious moment.
Shall not pass!
striking the bridge, the Balrog plummets. You think this would be the end of it, but nope. Gandalf's ankle is grabbed by the whip. Frodo tests out Gandalf, only for Boromir to stop him. Either because he genuinely cares about Frodo, or maybe just because he wants to protect the ring. Gandalf tries to climb up, only to say,
"Fly, you fools!"
One of the dumbest claims against this scene is that the Fellowship allowed Gandalf to die, which is the biggest lie I've ever seen. For one, Gandalf is actually far away when you relate his position to the Fellowship's. If they try to make it to him, they'll be shot by goblins, which you see right after Gandalf falls. Plus, Gandalf urges him to go on. He knows the Balrog needs to be stopped, or otherwise they'll catch up to him, and he's the only one that can stop it.
Some people say, why does Boromir stop him? Why doesn't anyone go and help him? And there's two answers. One is that they're actually they are actually far away, but also that the rest of the bridge is in a bad way and could collapse at any second.
Oh,
but what I love in the book,
I didn't realise that.
It's what it is in the book.
Ah, okay.
What, didn't you do that for that reason?
I thought he stopped him because he's carrying the ring. He can't afford to have him.
Yeah, well,
That's what makes this boat so awesome. Despite his fears, he confronts them, even to the point he's willing to sacrifice himself to destroy it, making him a heroic character. And the scene following makes it hit that much harder. The Fellowship mourns his loss, with the hobbits having their cry moments. Legolas looking bewildered at the loss of Gandalf, not knowing how to take it, since he's an elf and not used to seeing death due to his immortality. But Aragorn knows they have to move on. He orders Legolas to get them up, only for Boromir to interject, begging to give the hobbits a moment for pity's sake. He continues to care for the hobbits, particularly Merry and Pippin, even despite having just fought for their lives. But Aragorn brings up the point that by nightfall, the place will be swarming with orcs, so they need to get to Lorien before then. He's the leader of the Fellowship now. He's forced to take up the mantle from Gandalf, showing that he can be a leader, potentially even a king. He calls for Frodo, who is alone, is probably taking the loss the hardest. With all the scenes he and Gandalf had together, this moment becomes so impactful, especially the last one I just gushed over. I'm glad they included this scene since it's not in the book, but it is necessary for a movie audience to feel the loss while not overly indulging in it. They make their way across the forts and into the woods. Gimli tells the hobbits of a terrible elf sorceress, where anyone who gazes at her are brought under a terrible spell and never seen again. Likely propaganda he's heard from his people, considering their strained relations with the elves. Meanwhile, Frodo hears the voice of a woman, the same one from the prologue, that he's bringing a great evil there. Gimli boasts that he won't be ensnared by her, and that he has eyes of an eagle and ears of a fox, only to be met with elves aiming their bows at him.
Breathed so loud we could have shot him in the dark.
This is Elven Commander Haldir. Originally, the introduction for the Lorien Elves was going to be much more action-packed, the Fellowship fleeing from a pack of goblins, only for the latter group to be stopped by arrows. There was even a shot in the original trailer of Legolas stringing an arrow and preparing to shoot, surrounded by a very Lorien-looking set. I think this was a good decision to cut that, not only because the actual scene is much more book-accurate, but also we just finished a pretty action-heavy segment of the movie, so piling more on top of it would be detrimental to the pacing. So it's nice that they had enough sense to know what to cut and when to take things slower. At night, Haldir greets Aragorn, Legolas, and Elvish, much to the frustration of Gimli. He's still not over his preconceived notions of the elves, even despite his time with Legolas so far. Haldir says they haven't dealt with elves since before the Dark Days, implying that their mutual hatred for each other has gone back a very long time, explaining Gimli's perspective on them. He retaliates in Dwarvish, only for Aragorn to say that was not so courteous, leaving up to interpretation of what he said, which I can only dream what some people fill the blanks with. Haldir senses the ring, and he tells them that they cannot go any further. Aragorn begins arguing with him, and Boromir attempts to comfort Frodo by claiming that Gandalf's death wasn't in vain, not to carry the weight of the dead. This is the first time Boromir has had a proper interaction with Frodo since the mountain scene, and it's nice seeing him actually care about Frodo more than just simply because he has the ring, which he desires. Haldir is convinced by Aragorn to allow them to continue to Lorien, with Haldir leading to Cara Scalathon, home of Celeborn and Galadriel, Lady of Light. The trees are similar to the ones from Isengard, which are also fake model trees. They look so good you'll be fooled to thinking they're simply more VFX. We finally meet Galadriel herself, same lady who's the narrator from the prologue, and once again, the glow just given to the elves gives them this ethereal quality that's just unmatched. Celeborn demands to speak with Gandalf, only for Galadriel to deduce that he's fallen to shadow. Legolas explains to Balrog and how they fell needlessly into the net of Moria. Gimli has the expression of remorse on his face, likely since he was the one most insistent on going there, so he's placing the guilt onto himself. Galadriel consoles him, telling him not to allow the emptiness of Khazad Dûm to fill his heart. For the world has become filled with peril, and in all lands, love is now mingled with grief. As she's saying this, she turns to look at Boromir staring at him and begins to break down into tears. She knows his true motive to save his land and how terrified he is of losing his people, and the thought is so overbearing for him he can't stand to even consider it. Galadriel says there is still hope in the Fellowship and to allow them to rest. While she's talking, she's also telepathically communicating to Frodo, greeting him, the one who's seen the Eye. While the team is resting, they all sing to lament Gandalf. Sam starts recounting a hymn that's lifted straight from Tolkien about the elves, the first time it's been brought up in a while, showing that he's very knowledgeable about them while also mourning Gandalf in his own way. And it's pretty good. Though I've been praising the tone how balanced it's been so far, there is one moment it does drop the ball. While Sam is recounting the point, Gimli is sleeping and snoring pretty loudly, with Aragorn hitting him to get him to stop. Intercutting this convenient bit with this sincere scene is somewhat tone deaf, and I think it should have been cut or never written in to begin with. Aragorn suggested Boromir to get some rest, but he says he can't find any rest there because of what Galadriel told him. Expanding on what he heard in the last scene, she spoke to Boromir about his father. There is hope left, but he can't see it. More, it's been long since his people have had any hope. Aragorn sits next to him. Boromir continues that his father's rule is failing, their people are losing faith. He looks to him to put things right, to see the glory of Gondor restored. This contextualizes why he's been seeking the ring so much. He has this extreme pressure and expectation put on him to save his kingdom, and he has a tough time dealing with that. With everything that's going on and his conflicting objectives with the rest of the Fellowship, he describes the city of Minas Tirith, and Boromir exclaims his assignment to return there as Lords of Gondor. He's grown to accept him as a friend, and maybe not a king, but at least a Lord of Gondor just like him, placing himself and Aragorn on equal footing in his eyes. But Aragorn doesn't reciprocate. He's still hesitant about returning to his people and claiming his mantle. I love this scene for how it develops their bonds between each other, and it outlines their current goals and desires. It foreshadows Boromir's father, a character that we'll see in the next film and will be prominent in the third. But things are still going to change for them, as well as their perspectives and what time we have left here. Everyone's asleep, but Frodo's awakened as Galadriel walks by. He follows her, she grabs a pitcher and fills it with water. This is where we get the iconic mirror Galadriel scene from the book. Frodo asks what he will see if he looks into the mirror, but she cannot tell, for the mirror shows many things. Things that were, are, or haven't come to pass. He steps towards the fountain, and he sees members of the Fellowship, then the Shire. It's peaceful at first, only for it to transition to being pillaged by orcs, with Sam and the rest of them being enslaved, showing what's at stake for Frodo if he fails, for not even the Shire will be safe from the incoming wrath of Mordor. The Eye appears once again, the ring is drawn to it, only for Frodo to grab it, causing him to fall back. Galadriel explains that the Fellowship is breaking, and has already begun. He will try to take the ring, and Frodo knows who she is referring to, Boromir, and it will happen to all of them, one by one. This reiterates what Gandalf brought up back before entering Moria, that evil will be drawn to the ring inside the Fellowship, and now it's only a ticking time bomb building up until that happens. Frodo offers Galadriel to take the ring, for he doesn't want that to come to pass, and she admits that she has desired it. This leads to her entering this dark phantom form, saying that she'll become a queen, where all shall love her in despair, ripped straight from the book. And the effects work so well at giving this horror vibe to her. Peter Jackson was a horror director before making these movies, and those roots will come to show even more later. Galadriel says she's passed the test, she'll take the journey to the Undying Lands herself. Frodo claims he can't do this alone, for only Galadriel to tell him that being a ring bearer is to be alone, showing him her ring, Ninya. The task is to point to him alone. If he cannot find a way, no one will. This is Frodo's conflict in the second half of the movie. He is challenged the dilemma of leaving his friends, whom he cares deeply about, to prevent them from falling to the ring, but he's afraid to do it. But as Galadriel puts it best, even the smallest person changed the course of the future. Bilbo managed to change the course of the future with his actions from his adventure, and now it's up to Frodo to do the same. I love this setup. It brings up a new challenge for Frodo to overcome, and it creates tension in the audience on how he'll be able to do this alone when he's only managed to make it this far because of his friends and allies. So what's it going to take for him to accomplish this task? Back in Isengard, Sauron explains to Lurtz the origin of the orcs. They used to be elves, taken by the dark powers, these dark powers being Morgoth. They were tortured, mutilated, ruined, and turned into a terrible form of life. This is much needed information for the audience, since we haven't had any elaboration of the orcs up until this point, outside them being an army for Sauron. and telling us that they used to be elves gives us some tragedy to the backstory that it used to be these innocent elves like the ones we've seen so far, only to be diminished into a terrible existence such as this. A much better way of fleshing out the orcs than a certain TV show that tries to make us sympathize with them. Now, they have been perfected, suggesting that the new orcs, such as lurts, are fairly recent, and they've only recently been able to produce them in large numbers. The Fighting Urukai.
Whom do you serve? Saruman.
The voice of Lurtz is provided by Lawrence McCrow. This guy voices some other characters in these movies, and we'll be hearing more from him in the future. We're provided with this epic montage of the orcs suiting up for combat, and we get this one funny bit of one of the labor orcs hitting one in the helmet to see if it's sturdy. Saruman orders the orcs to hunt down the Fellowship. They know no pain and no fear, and they will taste man flesh. He then orders Lurtz personally to bring the hobbits in alive and unspoiled, but to kill the others. The hunting party makes their way through Isengard into the countryside, and from the overhead shots, there seems to be at least 100, maybe up to 150 of them in total, giving us a fair idea how many of them there are. Back in Lorien, we get an important scene of Galadriel and Celeborn providing the Fellowship with gifts. They all get these elven cloaks to shield them from unfriendly eyes. Lampus bread, which is very nourishing and filling, and even satisfying with just a couple of bites. There's this funny bit with Merry and Pippin discuss how they've already eaten 4 of them, a callback to the second breakfast joke, where we learn just how much the hobbits eat. I like little callbacks and attention to details like that. Celeborn warns Aragorn that these strange creatures are bearing the White Hand. Seldom do the orcs travel by sunlight, but they have. He provides them with a dagger, telling them that they're being tracked, building off the previous scene, with the looming danger that the Uruks are closing in. Since Saruman knows they travel from Moria, and Lorien is pretty close by, it makes sense that he will deduce that the Fellowship is there and will eventually have to leave. I've seen the argument that makes no sense that Saruman pushed them to travel from Moria when that would risk losing the ring. If this will book Saruman, that would be a plot hole, but I don't think that's the case here. In the books, Saruman has plans to overthrow Sauron, which requires him to have possession of the ring. Well, unless I'm missing something here, that's not really in the movies. I know Christopher Lee said something about that in one of the commentaries of the movies, but that information isn't provided in any shape or form I could think of within the actual narrative. He's simply trying to have his share of Sauron's rule of Middle-earth, and trying to implement his ulterior motives into the films will be pushing it as they are, so not including it is fine, I think. He's trying to retrieve the ring if he can, but even if they lose it, they're guaranteed to win anyway. It's what's already been built up to earlier, and that's what we see in Return of the King. They already have an army that's capable of taking Middle-earth. It's not a matter of if they're going to win, but more so a matter of when, if that makes any sense. And even without that element, Saruman is still a great villain and character in these movies. Legolas is given an elven bow, Merry and Pippin are given daggers, Sam's provided with an elven rope, and Gimli asks for one of Galadriel's hairs, but as he tells Legolas as they're traveling, she gave him 3. The time they spent in Lorien and Galadriel's compassion has challenged Gimli's perception of not only her, but the elves in general. His prejudices about them been proven wrong, and that carries over his developing friendship with Legolas. This is the first positive interaction the two have had so far, and turns to something truly special later. Aragorn doesn't receive any gifts, for he has already been given the Even Star, but Galadriel informs Aragorn that the Even Star is diminishing. Lastly, she provides Frodo with a pile of Arundel, their most beloved star. These gifts all symbolize some aspect of the characters. The hobbits gaining their courage, Gimli's changing relations to the elves, and Aragorn's love for Arwen. But several of these items become very plot relevant going forward, and the extended version does a much better job of explaining them than the theatrical cut, which mostly just focuses on the pile, though it'll be easier to elaborate on that as we go through. Galadriel greets them farewell and they leave by boat. Everything is calm for a bit, but as we see, the Uruks are closing in, and from Legolas' reaction, they seem to be close by, at least close enough for his elvish senses to hear them. Cut to nighttime. Boromir is keeping watch, and he sees it drifting along with something, or someone, holding onto it. Gollum has managed to track them since Moria, and he's still relentless in his pursuit of the ring. Sam begs Frodo to eat some food, but he refuses, and he hasn't been sleeping either. Sam tries to help Frodo, but he says he can't. Not this time, and orders him to get some sleep. It's clear that Galadriel's counsel about him completing the quest himself is weighing on his mind, but he hates he has to do it, and believes that he ultimately has no choice. From his point of view, he has to go on alone. He's closing himself off from the others, even Sam, his closest friend. A tragic turn of events for our main character. Boromir once again suggests to Aragorn they take the road to Minas Tirith, deemed to be the safest road. a place where they can regroup and strike Mordor from a place of strength. But Aragorn doesn't believe that there is any strength left in Gondor. Boromir points out that he was so quick to trust the elves, and questions why he has no strength in the race of men. There is weakness and frailty, but there is courage also, and honor to be found in men. He tells Aragorn that he is afraid of who and what he is, essentially calling him a coward. Aragorn's only response is that he will not lead the ring within 100 leagues of the city. While their friendship is building up to something positive, as we saw back in Lorien, where Boromir saw them both as equals, Aragorn is still adamant that men are still ultimately weak and unfit to rule the world, just like Elrond. The influence runs deep from his father figure. But Boromir still has a point to why men aren't perfect, that still isn't a reason to completely lose faith in them and deem them all to be unworthy. There are nuances to both sides, and it's believable that they hold the positions that they have. I also like how turbulent their friendship is in this version of the movie. While in the theatrical cut, it mostly just goes uphill after the Council of Elrond scene, the extended edition makes it far more complex, with ups and downs along the way. I think this is better, because it adds a more interesting dynamic to our friendship, and makes the ending payoff together hit that much harder.
This was a scene that was potentially very helpful between Aragorn and Boromir, that we did feel that we wanted them to go into Amon Hen and into Boromir's ultimate sacrifice and death with a certain amount of estrangement. Because the last time we had a scene between these two characters, obviously it was a scene with much more warmth in the Lothlorien forest.
We wanted those two great characters to part on bad terms. It's almost like lovers. I mean, that adds pathos, of course, to the death scene. But we didn't have time. Once you hit that river, the main reason to get rid of it is because you had to keep going.
The next day, the gang travels down the stream, with Aragorn and Boromir refusing to even look at each other. They come across the Argonath, statues of Isildur and his brother Anarion. The music and the effects come together to make this a very majestic moment, and I can only wonder what it's like to watch this in the cinema for the first time, going in completely blind. They pull into the shore and make camp. Aragorn and Gimli discuss their plans to cross the river, with Gimli protesting about traversing Ima Muil, a labyrinth of razor-sharp rocks and marshlands as far as the eye can see. Obstacles that we see in the next movie. Legolas claims he senses that something is drawing near, building off the scene where he sensed the Uruks earlier. Merry asks where Frodo is, and Aragorn notices that Boromir has left his shield. This is it. This is the scene that the entire second half of this film is built up to. And this one scene is the catalyst for the rest of the trilogy, so we're going to have to take an extra close look at this one. Frodo is out in the woods alone. Boromir is gathering wood, telling Frodo that none of them should be wandering alone, least of all him, only to be met with no response from Frodo. Claiming to notice him suffer day by day, there are other alternatives. Frodo claims it may seem like wisdom, but a warning for his heart. He knows what he's trying to do, and he's grown wise enough to detect the deceit. Boromir goes on to say that the others are afraid. They can't allow that to destroy what hope they have. He's attempting to appeal to Frodo's emotions and wants to blackmail him to do what he wants. But Frodo resists, for there is no other way. Boromir claims he only wants his strength to defend his people. Furiously throwing down the pile of wood, he asks Frodo to lend him the ring, asking Frodo what chance he thinks he has. They will find the ring and he will beg for death before the end. Frodo attempts to walk away, but Boromir follows him, referring to him as a fool, leading to the moment this movie's been expertly building up. The ring has corrupted Boromir ever since he laid his eyes on it during the council. He's been continuously tempted by it, and now, when he's one-on-one with Frodo, he takes what he believes is the only chance he has.
Save my unhappy chance. It couldn't be mine. It shouldn't be mine. Give it to me. Give it to me.
Frodo slips on the ring, causing Boromir to go on this rambling rage that he'll lead to the death of them all, and curses him and all the halflings. He slips on some leaves from the hill, causing him to hit his head on the ground. He realizes what he's just done, and he calls out to Frodo an apology, but to no avail. This part is expertly acted by Sean Bean, and it's the ultimate culmination of his fall. A lot of times, a fall of a heroic character is rushed or unsatisfying, but there are a few cases I could think of where an arc such as this has been so well built up and executed. Frodo flees while he's in the ethereal world, but when he's on top of the ruins of Mon Hen, he sees the Eye of Sauron, causing him to slip off the ring. Aragorn happens to be right by him, causing Frodo to run away. He has now seen firsthand what the ring can do to his companions, reaffirming his belief that he has to partake in this alone. Aragorn claims that he swore to protect him, but Frodo spins it, asking Aragorn if he can protect him from himself. He opens his hand, and the theme of the ring starts to play in the background. I call special attention to it because it always plays when it's attempting to corrupt an individual. So the movie is playing us into thinking Aragorn is next on its list. Frodo challenges Aragorn whether he will destroy it, and the ring calls out to his name. Aragorn kneels and closes Frodo's hand, claiming that he would go on with him to the very end, to the very fires of Mordor. Aragorn is a stronger man, and he's wise enough to know what the ring will do to him. It shows that man does have the capacity to resist the ring and its temptations, hinting against the idea that they're stronger than what he believes them to be. Frodo asks Aragorn to look after the others, especially Sam, for he wouldn't understand. Aragorn senses something, causing Frodo to expose a bit of his sword, and it's glowing blue. The Uruks have found them. Aragorn orders him to run while he walks out to confront them. This is a change from the book, since at this point, we're at the point where the Fellowship ends and Two Towers begins. But the film just ended with Frodo leaving, that might be too anticlimactic for moviegoers, so adding an action scene as the climax of the film has been naturally built up to is an understandable decision. Aragorn fiercely faces the Uruks head on, smartly using the steps to aggro the Uruks to separate them, while Lurtz orders the other Uruks to find the halflings. Frodo runs deeper into the woods, and Legolas and Gimli join the fray as Aragorn heads into the woods himself to kill the orcs before they can find Frodo. Frodo hides behind a tree as some of the orcs pass him. A common argument made against this scene is that the Uruks should have smelled Frodo and captured him. The piece of evidence often stems from a scene in the next movie. I was debating addressing that in the Two Towers video, but I think it's important to go ahead and discuss this now. This is what happens in that scene.
What is it? What do you smell? Man flesh.
So, this seals the deal, right? Well, I don't think so. The thing that needs to be taken into consideration is whether the Uruks can detect the distinct smell of Hobbit. To showcase what I mean, let's pull up a scene from the Hobbit movies as an example. In the second movie, when Bilbo meets Smaug, he says this.
But I don't remember smelling your kind before. Who are you, and where do you come from?
This makes sense, because Smaug is stuck inside a mountain that is far away from any hobbits, so he wouldn't be able to recognize their scent. Some may ask why the Uruks can't, since they're trying to capture hobbits. While it makes sense they can smell man flesh, either from the distinct smell of having been enemies with men for so long, or they're just given samples by Saruman, which he would have, considering they're right next to Rohan. On the other hand, they're far away from any hobbit settlement. The only thing I can think of that Saruman has that's from the hobbits is the pipe weed that we see that he has in the next movie. But they would smell the weed itself, not the smell of the hobbits. To them, any smell of the hobbits would be indistinguishable from anything else they may smell in the woods. I know this is kind of convoluted. The point is that they can't distinguish the smell of the hobbits, so I don't think it's the issue that they can't. Merry and Pippin are hanging some logs, and they tell Frodo to hide with them, but he shakes his head. Pippin is curious as to why, but Merry picks up that he's leaving. Pippin tries to stop them, but they notice that the Uruks are closing in. They turn to look at Frodo, and in an act of courage, they yell at the Uruks to chase them. They run the opposite direction to allow Frodo the chance to escape. Galadriel said while giving them their daggers that they will find their courage, and this is the payoff. They've come a long way from how they were at the start of the movie. I doubt they would have done anything approaching this level of courage, potentially risking capture and death, but due to the journey they've been on, they've become way more than just the simple mischievous hobbits they were at the start. As I said at the beginning of this video, they're far more than just ordinary comic relief, and this is when they start to shine beyond that. More action happens, the hobbits are fleeing only to be caught by more Uruks, including one with an axe about to strike him. Some question why he's about to do this, since they're told to bring them in alive, but as we've seen and will continue to see, these guys are born psychopathic and bloodthirsty, plus, soldiers have done crazier acts in similar situations, so I don't think this is really an issue. Before he can land a blow, Boromir charges him head on and kills him. There is this weird part when Uruk rushes past Legolas instead of towards him, falls, and then gets shot. That's just a weird directing mistake that just didn't get caught. Legolas shoots an orc in a bat that's tackling Aragorn, and they hear the horn of Gondor, Boromir's horn. They rush towards him, but they're faced with even more Uruks, and there's this excellent tracking shot showing just how many are converging on Boromir's position. Merry and Pippin show their courage again when they tackle an orc about to attack Boromir and stab him with their swords. Boromir tells them to run, but instead they start throwing stones at the Uruks to prevent them from overwhelming Boromir. A callback to what they did in a tomb fight. I've heard Christopher Tolkien has claimed that these movies are just action films for teenagers, and while that could be somewhat true to a small extent, I find that comment disingenuous. The action still contributes to the story, and this is just part of the way to tell it. The hobbits are showing their development as the action is happening. That is still good storytelling. What happens next is one of the best action scenes in cinematic history. As the Uruks close in, Lurtz is in the rear of the boat and some arrows on hand. He draws his bow, and then... the music stops. the hobbits are in shock, and Boromir kneels. But he gets back up, and continues killing Uruks. Lurtz aims again, and Boromir is shot once more. But he still gets back up, and he won't back down. Only be shot once more. The hobbits attempt to rush the Uruks, only to be captured easily. As the rest of the party retreats, Lurtz stays behind, slowly drawing one final shot. He believes he's won, he's arrogantly drawing out the killing blow. Until... What follows is a brief but brutal fight. Lurtz is so tough, even Aragorn's having trouble keeping up with him. Not even the Nazgûl were able to give him this much trouble, which is saying a lot about how skilled Aragorn is. Lurtz licks off the blood off the dagger Aragorn stabbed him with, and this is when the legendary moment happens where Viggo Mortensen deflects an actual dagger. If he didn't, it could have killed him, but they used to take anyway. Aragorn severs Lurtz's arm, stabs him, only for Lurtz to pull himself towards Aragorn to get to him, but Aragorn falls with a decapitation. What an epic fight scene. Now, we get to everyone's favorite scene in this movie. There's a goof we can see when the Urg's looking up, but does that change how good the scene is? Nope. Boromir tells Aragorn they took the little ones, and he tried to take the ring from Frodo. He asks for Aragorn's forgiveness, claiming to have failed them all. But Aragorn tells the truth. He didn't fail them. He fought bravely. He's redeemed himself. He got lost in his short-sighted goal to save his people, but now he's learned that wasn't the right path. And taking what appeared to be an easier way is what led him to being corrupted. But he kept his honor. While he lies dying, Aragorn says that while he doesn't know the strength of his own blood, he still won't let the White Sea fall, nor our people fall. I've been mentioning a lot about challenges in relation to a character and their beliefs. This is how a character develops in their arc. Aragorn started with this nihilistic outlook on men, but Boromir's courage has shown that they're not so weak as he thought.
Yes, there is weakness, there is frailty, but there is courage also, and honor to be found in men.
He now accepts men as his people, and even if he's not ready yet to claim the mantle of king, he gives Boromir his sword and the others show up, and we get Boromir's last words.
I would have followed you, my brother, my captain, my king.
Boromir's arc is now completed. He is now grown to accept Aragorn not only as an equal, but the rightful heir of Gondor. This is a beautiful moment and one of the best scenes in this trilogy. Everything in this film has come together so well, and the arcs of these two characters elevates the scene to being as good as it is. Aragorn tells Boromir to be at peace and kisses his forehead. Frodo is by himself near the boat as Sam rushes towards them. He recounts what Gandalf said in their last scene together on deciding what to do with the time that is given to you. He's now decided to take on this quest alone if that's what it takes to save the world. He boards the boat and begins paddling, but Sam refuses to allow him to leave. Even when he can't swim, he tries anyway. He begins drowning, but Frodo pulls him back up. Sam recounts once again about the promise he made to Gandalf, and he is adamant about following it through. Frodo is so touched by this, he allows Sam to go with him. While I don't find it as touching as the last scene, it still pulls the heartstrings, man. Frodo's arc in this movie is now also complete. He knows that while the journey is treacherous, he doesn't have to go at it alone. There is still strength and friendship that is more powerful than even the corrupting power of the ring can contend with. A theme that is one of the most prevalent in this story and will continue to be persistent. Boromir's body is laid on a boat and is carried by the waves into the waterfall. When the two hobbits cross, Legolas attempts to follow them, but notices that Aragorn isn't trying to follow them. We can see that he's wearing Boromir's gauntlets. This was suggested by Mortensen, and I think it was a great call, showing that he intends to wear them as a reminder of his fallen friend and intends to honor his vows to him. Claiming that the fate of the ring is no longer in their hands, they will not abandon Merry and Pippin to torment and death, not while they still have strength left. He orders to leave all that can be spared behind.
Let us hunt some orc.
The three run off into woods to pursue the Uruk hunting party, concluding their side of the story in this film. Frodo and Sam arrive at Muil, where Mordor is within sight. Frodo laments that they may not see the others again, but Sam remains optimistic that they will. Frodo claims that he's glad to have him by his side, leaving on a heartwarming and optimistic note. Then, the movie ends. I'm not going to provide a long conclusion in this video. I plan on doing that when I finish this trilogy in the Return of the King video, but to provide some sense of finality in this movie, all I have to say is...
That was an awesome f***ing movie! Yeah, it was!
Holy tits! This film is something else. I think the rest of this video speaks for itself, but I think this is honestly the best start to any trilogy ever made, particularly in the sense that this film was made with the idea of being the start of a trilogy in mind, as opposed to some other films which were originally tended to be a fully standalone movie. But regardless, there are very few ways I could think of that this movie could be any better. Most of the issues I brought up are either so minor and inconsequential that the quality remains virtually untouched. And even what appears to be more problematic can be defended. That's how tight everything is. It's hard to make a movie, I realize that. The amount of talent and effort that went into this one film alone is probably more than many other movies being made today. That's why I love watching the behind the scenes of this movie and seeing what went to every aspect of its production. This movie remains a top contender for being the king of fantasy movies outside its own sequels. This has been a video I've been wanting to make for a very long time now, and I hope it didn't disappoint. I love this movie, and I can't wait to discuss the next two, because they're just as good. Without this movie, they wouldn't have had such a good foundation to make them as good, which I think is worth considering. I'm not sure when I'll get to work on the Two Towers video, since I have some other video ideas in the works. I fully intend to see the series through, whether they do well in viewership or not, because these movies mean far too much to me to care about that. With all of that being said, this is Skids, signing off.